I'm the Dolphin of France. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 401, The Courage of Civilians. Morocco's Black Guard still fought in a very organized manner. Under the command of the officers, the line array quickly rotated and turned into reinforcement facing the French point urged by bugles. 4 rows of nearly 1,000 black soldiers rushed toward the French army point. Ney personally stood at the front of the infantry, drew his sword, and pointed it at the densely packed dark soldiers on the opposite side, shouting loudly, "Don't be afraid, they are all captured slaves, and don't know how to fight. As long as you shoot as you did in training, they will escape soon." Although he said this, it can be seen from the neat cues of those Moroccan soldiers that they have been strictly trained, and their combat effectiveness cannot be underestimated. Soon, the Moroccan army was approaching less than 80 steps, and some of Ney's soldiers started shooting without permission in panic. Fortunately, the panic did not spread. When the two sides were about 60 steps apart, Ney swung his sword vigorously, shooting more than 200 Cholville 1763 flintlock guns emitted uneven firelight, causing the Moroccans to pause for a moment, but the opponent continued to advance almost immediately. At the same time, because the number of people in Morocco was several times greater, both ends of the narrow infantry line began to close inward, forming an encirclement of Ney and the others. Don't be afraid. Ney was still standing at the forefront of the team despite the enemy's fire, loudly encouraging morale. Don't shake your hands and reload as soon as possible. Our people will be here soon. These slaves will not do anything to you. His 200 soldiers who were farmers not long ago felt a lot more at ease when they saw Chief Ney standing there without fear. Following the command of the drum, they fought with the Moroccan guards at a distance of 40 steps. A shootout. Bullets kept chirping by Ney's ears, and then a shrill scream came from behind. He looked sideways and saw that at least 20 people had been shot. Their bodies were all torn off by bullets and they fell to the ground, twisting and struggling like fish thrown ashore. The surrounding soldiers were covered in their blood and internal organs, and they were so frightened that they stayed in place and were at a loss. Some people began to move backwards in great fear. Hang on. Ney picked up the gun of a dead soldier and began to load ammunition. He shouted at the same time, "Think of the oath you swore when you came. As long as you hold on for another half hour, you can return home with full honors. Yours, your family and fellow villagers will be proud of you, and your stories will be spread among the neighbors, and it all starts with your fucking hands. Move it, quick." He then looked at the less than 300 Tunisian soldiers on the flanks. "It's time for you to rest, right? Listen to my order and shoot together." He quickly loaded his gun and took aim at the oncoming blackface. Under his leadership, the French soldiers finally tremblingly began to pour gunpowder into the barrels, and the Tunisian soldiers also raised their guns again. "Aim shooting," Ney shouted and pulled the trigger. There was a crackling sound of gunfire behind him. The Moroccans, who were almost in the face, did not expect that the French army could organize a volley. Suddenly, nearly 30 people fell over in response, and the soldiers on both sides of the deceased were subconsciously. He turned his back, trying to avoid the bullet. "Very good. You guys did it." Ney's voice was already a little hoarse, but she still shouted with all her strength, "Keep loading. Don't stop." There was no wind near the battlefield, and the thick smoke blocked the sight of the French soldiers, which actually made them less afraid. Anyway, Chief Ney is still with them, which means the situation is not too bad. The Tunisian soldiers next to them also started shooting intermittently, and the Moroccans actually began to retreat under the heavy blows when they heard the enemy's footsteps starting to move away. The French and Tunisians who were still standing on the same spot let out a burst of relief cheers, even if they had been so scared that they peed their pants a moment ago. Ney was about to breathe a sigh of relief when she vaguely heard the tapping sound of bang bang coming from the wings, and her pupils suddenly shrank. The Moroccans surrounded him from both sides. They had been extremely reluctant to withstand the frontal attack just now. If they were attacked from a flank, they would inevitably collapse immediately. He closed his eyes and made a cross on his chest, thinking about which direction to attack. Retreat was impossible, and at such a close distance, Turning his back towards the enemy was tantamount to suicide. And attacking the enemy on one side might be able to delay it for a while. I just don't know if these soldiers can adjust the direction of the line array in time, he muttered in his heart, but did not have the slightest thought of surrender. He grew up listening to his father, who was a soldier, talking about the 7 Years' War, and he hated cowards who surrendered the most. He always believed that he was the one who could deal with the enemy until the last moment. He ran back and forth, shouting orders to the officers to lead the soldiers to the north. However, just over 10 minutes later, he heard the noise in Arabic behind him. He looked at his soldiers again, still huddled together in a mess, not to mention the Tunisians. It is impossible to fight in this formation. He suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He didn't expect that the first time he would actually command a battle would also be the last time. Just when he was about to die in a fight with the Moroccans, the sound of horse hooves appeared again in the south. Have the enemy's cavalry also come up? He smiled and shook his head, drew his sword, and pointed behind the smoke. Come on, I'm not afraid of you. After waiting for a while, the Moroccans' attack seemed to slow down, and then there was a faint sound of gunfire behind them. Although he didn't know what was going on, he immediately seized the opportunity and urged the soldiers to line up. The smoke finally dissipated, and he stood on his horse and looked south with a telescope and saw a team of cavalry in white uniforms harassing the enemy's flank and rear, forcing the Moroccans to tighten their formation for defense. It's those nobles. For the first time in his life, he felt that those nobles were not so annoying, and turned to the soldiers excitedly. Our reinforcement have arrived. Victory belongs to us. Channel urged the flying crossbow under his crotch, quickly passed by the side of the Moroccan army, and raised his carbine to pull the trigger at the dark enemy. At a distance of more than 80 steps, the short carbine has no killing power at all, but its huge sound can scare the enemy. When more than 150 noble cavalrymen rushed to a nearby place and turned around to form a team. The Moroccans were confused by the sudden attack and quickly chose to retreat. Moro ordered the soldiers to move closer to their own side, and soon found me in the crowd. He stepped forward, raised his hat gracefully, and smiled. Mr. Lieutenant, you seem to be surrounded by the enemy. Fortunately, I appeared in time and saved you. How about it? Are we awesome? Chapter 402 A Reckless Battle Plan. Seeing me stroking her chest and saluting, Moro waved his hand casually. Oh, you don't need to be too grateful. God's guidance cavalry only comes to follow honor. He hesitated and really wanted to kick this aristocratic man with a hateful face. He took a deep breath and said, I still want to thank you for your reinforcement. However, it is us who guard Tamiret after all. Oh. Moro glanced at the Tunisian cuirassied. If they hadn't held back the enemy, you and your people would have been able to stand outside the town of Tamiret. They are also commanded by me. No. Moro smiled like a little fox who stole a chicken. I ordered them to defend in the west of the city. If you don't believe me, you can ask your messenger. Well, I hope he was not killed in action. He hesitated again and winked at his attendant. The latter left quickly and ran back a moment later, nodding to him and saying, Sir Lieutenant, this is indeed the order from Lieutenant Moro. God. More than half an hour later, the other soldiers brought by me finally completed the team and caught up. Later, the remaining noble cavalry also arrived, but most of them came on foot. In order to rush for time, Moro selected 150 cavalrymen with better riding skills and asked others to give their horses to them. With 3 horses per person, they galloped all the way to catch up with the reinforcement. After the nobles and commoners cooperated for a time, they seemed to be less tit-for-tat than before, and they immediately returned to Tamiret city together outside the city hall. He glanced at the setting sun and said to Moro, it seems that the Moroccans will not come again today, so we can go have dinner. He rolled his eyes at him without leaving any trace, then turned and walked toward the west of the city. Let the soldiers build a parapet at this moment. It will be useful when the enemy attacks tomorrow. The parapet? Moro frowned. Are you planning to defend this place? Of course, otherwise why would we fight to stop the Moroccans today? Moro waved his hand disapprovingly. Didn't you hear the news? The Moroccan army has at least tens of thousands of people, and together we, how many soldiers did you bring? 855 people. Now there are only 782 people left. Well, we have less than 1,800 people in total. Including the Tunisian soldiers, there are only 2,000 people. Moreau gestured around. If we stay here, we will be surrounded immediately. There is no fortress to rely on in this town. What are you afraid of? Nee snorted coldly. General Shura must have learned that there is an attack here, and his army will arrive in 3 or 4 days. We can't hold on here for 2 days. Abel cannot. It's up to you. You can take the people away, and I'll guard Tamiret myself. Ah. You sure? No, that's reckless. Moreau immediately added without waiting for the other party to get angry. Since we have to be reckless, why don't we use a method with a higher success rate? Nee looked at him with some surprise. What are your ideas? It's very simple. Leave the Tunisian soldiers and your wounded in the town. Moreau said, well, the number may not be enough, so leave the servants as well. More than half of the nobles brought servants with them. These servants had been trained to some extent and had some combat capabilities, so there will be nearly 1,000 people in the city. Let them disguise themselves as us. We will go to the south of Tamiret. Nee subconsciously said, what are you going to do? Of course they are pretending to be General Shura's troops. Moreau smiled slyly. Point before dawn the next day, the noble army and the civilian army left Tamiret together. He glanced at the large trucks of logistics supplies, then looked back at the town. He turned to Moreau uneasy and said, where did you get these things? They couldn't have been robbed. You are insulting me. Moreau pretended to be angry. These are all recruited for us by the municipal commissioner overnight. Ah, but you don't have the right to recruit people. They are all here to replenish the soldiers of Shura's army. They don't even have a serial number before officially reporting, let alone recruiting supplies. Well, I told them that it was General Shura who authorized it. Got. Nee leaned closer nervously and whispered, this will be court-martialed, so you better pray we win. I will pray for you. No, it's for you. Well, I told them to relay your order. You're such a bastard. The two took their respective troops to more than 10 kilometers away from Tamiret, and then chose a highland to camp. The camp was built more than twice as big as they needed. Soon, Moreau's hussars came to report, Sir Lieutenant, the Moroccans have begun to attack Tamiret. There are more than 3,000 enemy troops. Nee was shocked. Let's go to the rescue quickly. Moreau looked at his pocket watch, shook his head and said, no need. 1,000 people can definitely defend the city for 4 or 5 hours. And it will be dark in 2 hours. He put away his watch. Everyone, have a good rest. We will take the initiative to attack early tomorrow morning. That will be like the momentum of General Shura. The next day. Gold, the Black General of Morocco, looked at the nearly 5,000 troops surrounding Tamiret through his telescope. With a sneer in his eyes, there should be less than 2,000 French troops in the town. Perhaps Tunisian troops, but as long as his troops launch an attack, they will definitely be able to capture this place today. Although it was 1 day later than Said Pasha hoped, he could still occupy the port of Bizet before the main force of the French army came back to support. He waved his finger at the attendant beside him, and soon a low horn sounded all around, and more than 10 cannons began to pour shells into the town. Gold looked at the wooden fence outside Tamiret that was blown to pieces, and was about to order the whole army to attack, when he saw 2 cavalrymen rushing over and saluted him. General, a French army appeared on our right wing, and it seems to be launching an attack. How many people are there? It's not clear yet. They have a lot of alert cavalry and it's hard to get close. Where did the large group of French troops come from nearby? A Gold thought for a while and turned his horse to the south. There was still some distance from the right wing of the Moroccan army when a Gold heard the rumbling of artillery. He counted silently in his mind. There should be more than 15 cannons. This is definitely the main force of the French army. Could it be that Shura's corps has arrived? For the sake of caution, A gold hurriedly withdrew the troops besieging Tamiret and arranged a defensive line on the south side point not far from the Moroccan army. A group of French soldiers were filling gunpowder into a dozen iron barrels wrapped in cowhide, pounding them, sealing them with mud, and then igniting the gunpowder from the small hole at the back of the iron barrels. Suddenly, flames burst out, making a series of deafening roars. Chapter 403 Fiefdom and Title. He glanced at the iron barrel cannons and said to Moreau with disdain, "Your little invention is really interesting, but it will certainly not fool the Moroccans for too long, because they will find that the other side has been shelling for a long time, but no one of them has been injured. You should read David Hume's A Treatise of Human Nature." Moreau pointed to the Moroccan positions in the distance. "They will only think they are lucky and then laugh at the poor skills of the French gunners. It's up to you." After the shelling continued for a while, the French infantry line appeared on the horizon. He nervously told the soldiers to keep their distance and back to the woods. This infantry line only had one row, and the distance between people was very large. Only by using the dim woods as the background could they get away with it. And Moreau led the cavalry to run back and forth on both sides of the line, showing a look of going to a big battle. Gold, who was in the distance, frowned as he looked at the infantry line that was more than 1 kilometer long and the dusty cavalry team. There were at least 4,000 infantry, more than 1,000 cavalry, and 15 cannons. This scale was definitely the surer corps, but how did they get here from the lower reaches of the Majorda River in such a short time? Not long after, another cavalry came to report that they had found the French camp, which was just 4 miles to the south. Judging from the scale, there should be nearly 10,000 troops stationed there. Now Gold was even more convinced. According to the combat effectiveness of the French army, his 5 or 6,000 people were no match at all. He could only wait for Said Pasha to lead the main force of the guards to arrive before he could have a decisive battle with the French. No, that's not right. He was suddenly startled. According to the instructions of His Majesty the Sultan, the guards should avoid conflict with the main force of the French army. They came to Tunisia to plunder and then ask the British for compensation. It is not in Morocco's interest to fight a big country like France, whether winning or losing. He pondered for a long time, turned around and ordered his attendants, "Leave the Acadian Legion, and the others retreat in secret. Oh, let the cannons keep firing to confuse the French." Yes, General. Moreau originally thought that he had to repel 1 or 2 Moroccan exploratory attacks at all costs to completely scare the Moroccans, but he didn't expect that the other side had no intention of fighting at all. Of course, he was happy to delay time, so he let the iron barrel cannon fire with all his strength, pretending that the battle was fierce. So the two armies boomed and shot at each other for a whole day at a distance of nearly 1 kilometer. And each withdrew their troops after dark. The next day, they continued to shoot at each other until the afternoon, when Moreau suddenly felt something was wrong. So he took the risk of leading half of the cavalry to harass the Moroccans, but found that there was no enemy cavalry to defend at all. He simply circled around Tamiret several times, and finally confirmed that there were less than 2,000 Moroccan troops still on the front line, and the other enemies had long disappeared. He never thought that he acted so well that he actually scared the Moroccans away. After he went back, he discussed with me and gathered all the troops, together with the hundreds of Tunisian troops of Tamiret, and launched a fierce attack on the Moroccan army from 2 directions at the same time. Paris, the second floor of the Tuileries Palace. Joseph looked at the map of North Africa on the table with a worried expression. According to the intelligence sent last week, there were large-scale troop movements in Algiers and Tripoli. Obviously, the British could not help but take action against Tunisia. The news from India was that the Mysore army was attacking Tiruchirappalli, which was the southernmost state of Carnatic. Once Mysore occupied it, it would face Nagpattinam, the only supply point of Britain in southeastern India. Joseph was sure that as long as Nagpattinam was at risk of being lost, the British would definitely return to the negotiation table. This was an important port for British caravans returning from East Asia. If they don't resupply here, British merchant ships will have to go hundreds of nautical miles to Madras in central India. to get fresh water and food, or pay France in Pondicherry to buy supplies. Therefore, the British will definitely spend a lot of money to create chaos in Tunisia before problems arise in Nagpatinam, and use it as a bargaining chip. To exchange for India's interests, the General Staff has already dispatched 6,000 troops to reinforce Tunisia, which is the limit of what France can afford financially. To be honest, if there is a big problem in the situation in Tunisia, then Joseph can only withdraw the Guards Corps to North Africa to clean up the mess, which will inevitably affect the strategic deployment of the southern Netherlands. If it really comes to that, he will have to consider whether to accept the British conditions, and both sides will stop. That also means that his strategy to restrict the British in India has failed. At this moment, Emin knocked on the door and handed him a secret report. "Your Highness, Tunisia just sent it." Joseph immediately opened the wooden cylinder as quickly as possible and poured out the few pages inside. When he saw that the report was sent by General Barthélemy Louis Joseph Scherer, he couldn't help but wonder. Normally, this should be the work of the Intelligence Bureau. He hurriedly read the text carefully. At the beginning, it mentioned that the Moroccans had intervened in the siege of Tunisia, sent more than 14,000 of the most elite black guards, and sent the Algiers guards to faint at Kaf to lure the main force of Scheerer's corps to the lower reaches of the Majerda River. Joseph couldn't help but frown, and continued to look down, and saw Scherer said that 2 volunteer teams who came to report to the Legion stubbornly held Tamiret, and with a team of less than 2,000 people, they repelled the 10,000 Moroccan troops, captured more than 700 people, and seized 11 cannons. Joseph raised his eyebrows. 2,000 against 10,000, a great victory, and captured prisoners and seized cannons. What's the situation? He turned to the last page and saw the specific battle report, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Victor Moreau, Michel Ney. It turned out that the 2 marshals were commanding the battle. It's not surprising to achieve a record of 1 to 5. Joseph secretly sighed that France is really full of talents. The invincible marshals under the emperor are now just 2 small lieutenants, each with soldiers who are not under their command, and unexpectedly disintegrated the Moroccan sneak attack. No wonder this intelligence was reported by Scherer. He had won the victory on the front line and wanted to report it to me before the intelligence agency. When Joseph saw that the noble soldiers of Moreau called themselves the God's Guidance Cavalry Regiment, he couldn't help shaking his head and laughing. They were all adults, but they still gave themselves such a childish name. But since they like it, let's do it as they wish. Joseph immediately picked up his pen and wrote a note at the end of the report, officially granting the title of God's Guidance Royal Cavalry Regiment to the 1,000 noble soldiers. At the same time, Moreau was promoted to major and Ney was promoted to captain. The former was granted 700 hectares of land in Tripoli, and the latter was granted 500 hectares. Chapter 404 Counterattack. As for other officers and soldiers who performed meritorious service in the battle, Joseph also generously gave them corresponding awards. After handing over all the documents to the official responsible for delivering confidential letters, Joseph asked Emin to call Denico, the general manager of Paris Business Daily. This great victory in Tamiret not only stabilized the situation in northwest Tunisia and allowed him to gain 2 officers with outstanding abilities, but also had very important propaganda significance. Only 2 months after Joseph last called on the nobles in the Palace of Versailles to fight for His Majesty the King and France on the battlefield like warriors, Moreau led 1,000 young nobles to achieve outstanding results and receive generous rewards. This matter must be well publicized to attract more nobles to join the army. As for Ney, as a commoner from a Cooper family, he was able to be granted a territory, and after owning the territory, he would also have a corresponding title, which would also greatly encourage the common people. It can be predicted that France's ability to mobilize troops will far exceed that of other European powers in the future, and morale will be directly raised to a very high level. Of course, with France's current financial situation, it can only support an army of about 150,000 at most, and there are many old style troops among them. However, as the war situation in India develops in a direction that is favorable to Mysore, Tunisia should be able to break through soon. In addition, the coal and iron industries in the southern Netherlands and Luxembourg will gradually begin to go into production point by then. The dividends of Tunisia and the lowlands, which have been laid out for a long time, will truly be reflected, bringing a lot of benefits to the French finances. At the same time, the troops stationed in North Africa and the southern Netherlands can also return to the country and no longer need to invest huge military expenditures under the principle of increasing revenue and reducing expenditure. The financial difficulties will be significantly improved. It won't take many years for France to develop to a state of full of martial virtue where it can recruit soldiers and fight wars. More than an hour later, the slightly plump Danico entered the office of the Tuileries Palace under the guidance of Emmanuel. When he saw Joseph, he bowed and saluted. "Your Highness, I haven't been summoned by you for a long time. I'm so excited. May God bless you." Joseph smiled and returned the salute. After motioning him to sit down, he told him about the great victory of Tamarais, and finally said, "I need you to take personal responsibility and vigorously publicize this matter nationwide." "Of course, no problem, Your Highness." Danico bowed and gestured, and then said very skillfully, "I think we can send a few reporters to North Africa to interview Commander Moreau, and Michel Ney, yes, and Commander Ney, oh, and their soldiers. The relevant news will be published on the front page of newspapers within a week. You can also organize a My North African Hero essay contest and let citizens submit articles to praise the warriors who have made meritorious contributions in the battle, and give some bonuses to those who write better. Then find a few well-known writers and ask them to write a serialized novel about the battle in Tamarais. By the way, Your Highness, do the two commanders have wives or lovers? You know, people like to read about love affairs." Joseph looked at the newspaper manager with some surprise. He had learned all the propaganda tricks he had used before, and there was nothing to add. "It seems that they are not married yet." When he said this, he suddenly remembered the scammer that Moreau married in history. Miliolo. This woman was extremely ambitious and had a strong desire for power. After marrying Moreau, she used his fame to flirt with foreign forces and participated in the coup of the royalists. After the coup failed, she went to the Russian Tsar. Russia had joined the anti-French alliance at that time and colluded with the famous French traitor Bernadotte to trick Moreau into going to Russia and becoming the enemy of the emperor. It was because of this woman that Moreau was implicated and had not been able to gain the full trust of the emperor. In the end, finally, he had to go into exile in the United States, missing many opportunities to make achievements on the battlefield. Joseph recalled Moreau's life, and he seemed to be married in his 30s. In other words, he had plenty of time to change his fate of being with that pitfall woman. For example, he could introduce him to a good marriage in advance. After arranging the publicity of the combat hero and sending Danico away, Joseph prepared to go to the Palace of Versailles to rehearse the drama. He had to fulfill his promise to his mother. Just as he was about to go out, he saw Berthier rushing over, saluted him, and then took out the document commending Moreau, Ney and others. "Your Highness, there is no problem with your commendation of the North African Corps, promotion, and honors, but this fiefdom, you seem to have written the place name wrong." "Wrote it wrong?" Joseph took the document he signed and looked at it. "That's right," Berthier said somewhat embarrassedly. "Your Highness, Tripoli is not French territory." Joseph turned to the page where Schurrer reported on the situation in Tunisia and pushed it in front of him. "Tripoli has invaded the southeastern provinces of Tunisia many times, looting 6 tribes and more than 20 villages and towns. At the end of last month, Benjiel's 2,000 troops occupied the town of Ramada in southern Tataoun, resulting in more than 300 casualties there. According to the intelligence agency, he is still mobilizing more troops to launch a larger scale attack. In addition, Tripoli pirates have also begun to rob our merchant ships, and our joint fleet has to rush to the Gulf of Gabes for escort." He looked at Berthier and said in a cold tone, "In the face of such provocation, we will declare war on Tripoli. As for Moreau and his fiefdom, we just need to conquer it ourselves." After the failure of the Moroccan Guards, the strongest force in North Africa, the situation in Tunisia has become basically clear. Shura's main force will be responsible for the defense of northwest Tunisia. Although this corps is an old-style army, if it is well prepared, leaving 15,000 people plus 5,000 local troops in Tunisia is enough to guard against the Moroccan and Algiers coalition forces of less than 30,000. Especially when the latter has just suffered a defeat and morale is low. The 5,000 soldiers separated from Shura's corps followed the new force of Moroni to the southeast to deal with Tripoli. Now they only have to wait for the British to stop supporting Algiers and other countries, and France can immediately launch a counterattack against Tripoli. After that, Joseph even prepared to teach Algiers a lesson. And, in order to ease the situation in India this time, the British could only watch his little brother in North Africa get beaten. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 405, the channel connecting Egypt. As for the other major European countries, they should not have much reaction to France sending troops to Tripoli. Austria was beaten to a pulp in Silesia and was begging France to send troops to reinforce it. Spain is a relative of theirs and has a secret agreement with France to jointly recapture Gibraltar and unify the Iberian Peninsula. At most, if you give him some benefits, he will definitely stay out of it. Russia is even more looking forward to France sending troops to Tripoli. After all, the 12,000 soldiers stationed there are all Ottoman guards. If Russia wants to control the Black Sea, it must completely defeat the Ottomans. If France can destroy more Ottoman troops in North Africa, they will have fewer enemies on the battlefield in the future. In addition, the most frequent routes of the Gemini Trading Company are the Mediterranean routes. France can control one more trading port in the Mediterranean, and Russia can also gain more benefits from it. Poland is experiencing a national awakening. The elite class goes to the streets to give speeches and organize public demonstrations all day long. It is so exciting that they have no time to care about other people's affairs. The only big country that would oppose France's attack on Tripoli is Prussia. But the Prussian navy, forget it. He basically has no navy, so even if he has an opinion, what can he do? Anyway, Prussia and France have already started a war in the southern Netherlands. At worst, we can continue to increase our troops and see if my uncle will blow your ass in Silesia. Other small countries, such as Sardinia, Denmark, Bavaria, etc., dare not meddle in France's affairs, so this time Joseph of Tripoli is determined. Speaking of which, we have to thank the British. If they hadn't manipulated behind the scenes and let Benjil attack Tunisia, he really wouldn't have found such a solid reason to send troops. In fact, in the eyes of European countries at this time, Tripoli is basically a desolate place with a population of less than 700,000. Although the land area is only slightly smaller than Tunisia. Note 1. Both the output and the port location are very average. Only a few livable cities such as Tripoli and Zoya, as well as the port of Tripoli, are of slight value. However, Joseph knew very well that Tripoli would be an important passage to Egypt. Without Tripoli, it would be an unrealistic fantasy to want to dig the Suez Canal in Egypt. After the Suez Canal is opened, the sea trade route between the Far East and Europe can be shortened by half. It can be said that whoever gets the Suez Canal can control the economic lifeline of Europe. In this case, the British will definitely risk their lives to prevent France from getting the canal. Before the British maritime hegemony can be shaken, it is only possible to gain a foothold in Egypt through land supplies in Tripoli. Joseph must take advantage of the good international situation created at the moment and take actual control of Tripoli as soon as possible. When other countries react and want to intervene, it will be too late. Berthier looked at the Crown Prince in surprise, and it took a long time before he said, "Your Highness, a large number of our troops are tied up in the southern Netherlands and Silesia. If we rashly attack Tripoli, what if the Ottomans react violently? In any case, Tripoli is still a province of the Ottoman Empire in name, and his worries are not unreasonable." Joseph said calmly, Selim III focuses his main energy on promoting domestic reforms and will not waste his strength for the distant Tripoli. As long as the Ottomans send a large number of local troops, the Russians will immediately take advantage of the situation and swallow up all their territories along the Black Sea coast. And even if the Ottomans really want to fight, we have sufficient troops. Berthia was stunned and hesitated. Your Highness, forgive me for being blunt. Our troops may. Joseph smiled. If I'm not mistaken, the war in the southern Netherlands and Algiers will end by the end of the year, and we can withdraw more than 60,000 troops to Tripoli. October 25th, 1789. Paris. It was raining heavily, with a few quick flashes of lightning from time to time, making the whole sky look gloomy. Several inconspicuous black carriages stopped on the Versailles square. The door of the front carriage was pushed open, and a butler got out of the car with his neck shrunk, put the steps in front of the door, and then hurriedly held up an umbrella. The British Foreign Secretary, the Marquis of Wellesley, bent down and got out of the car, looking towards the gate of the Versailles Palace. He didn't see anyone coming to greet him, only a few guards staring at this side coldly at the door. Wellesley's face was darker than the dark clouds in the sky. Just this morning, he received a secret letter from Cornwallis, the Governor-General of India. The letter said that the Mayor of the League asked Britain to provide £250,000 military expenses, as well as 20 cannons and 15,000 flintlocks, can continue to send troops to reinforce Carnatic Point, and Hyderabad is asking for a sky-high price, asking Britain to return the Kandavadu area and get the Carnatics Nelu House. After repelling Mysore Point, Cornwallis has agreed to the Maratha's request on behalf of the East India Company. As for Hyderabad, he can only say that he will wait for the board of directors to make a decision, to delay time as much as possible. Wellesley took a deep breath of cold air. He didn't understand. Hyderabad had allied with Mysore decades ago, so it was understandable that it suddenly hindered it. But the Maratha had long since surrendered to Britain, so why would it suddenly make things difficult? How could he know that Salah, the French consul in Mysore, had secretly contacted the Maratha a few months ago? Salah remembered that the Crown Prince had said that Indians would feel that they had suffered a loss if they did not gain an advantage. So he and the Mysore representative Shah made promises to the Marathas, even saying that they would give North Canada to the Marathas and provide £200,000 of benefits in exchange for their support for Mysore. The Marathas turned around and used this as a price standard to put forward conditions to the British. As for Hyderabad, it raised the price to the British by 30% on the basis of the benefits given by Salah. Wellesley knew that the East India Company could only agree to their request without the assistance of the Indian princely states. The British army would be exhausted sooner or later if they travelled thousands of miles to fight Mysore. He gritted his teeth, stepped on the puddles on the ground, and led several diplomatic officials to the gate of the palace of Versailles. I don't know if it was because the rain was too heavy or the servant didn't hold the umbrella properly, but when Wellesley finally saw Talleyrand's angry face, half of his clothes were soaked by the rain, and water was dripping from his cuffs, making him look extremely embarrassed. Note 1. At the end of the 18th century, Tripoli was still populated only in the narrow coastal strip, and the inland part to the south was almost uninhabited. In addition, Benghazi and the areas further east are not currently part of Tripoli, so it is far less than Libya in the 21st century. Chapter 406. Negotiations between France and Britain. The super disgusting Talleyrand. Ha. I thought we would not meet until after Christmas Mass. Talleyrand pointed to the side of the corridor with a smile on his crutches. This way, my old friend. The Marquis of Wellesley followed silently, but secretly cursed in his heart. If it hadn't been for that idiot Cornwallis's poor performance on the battlefield, he wouldn't have had to rush to Paris to be ridiculed by the damn French. He walked a little further and suddenly felt something was wrong. He turned around and looked around. Your Majesty, Archbishop, are you going in the wrong direction? This does not seem to be the direction to the Peace Hall, according to French practice. Important negotiations at the Palace of Versailles are usually held in the Peace Hall. Talleyrand turned his head and showed an apologetic expression. Unfortunately, Your Majesty the Marquis, the Peace Hall is about to hold a signing ceremony between the Paris Gas Industry Company and the Paris City Hall for the installation of gas street lights. Well, you see, the gas industry company has already made an appointment there. It's the same if we go to other places to talk. Wellesley almost couldn't hold back his curse words. This damn lame man, did he mean that he, the dignified foreign minister of the British Empire, could not compare with any gas company? Talleyrand continued enthusiastically. Oh, by the way, Your Majesty the Marquis, the first installation ceremony of the gas street lights will be held in Paris on the 15th of next month. I sincerely invite you to attend. It is definitely an event not to be missed. I will consider it. The British man squeezed out a few words through his teeth with a sullen face. Soon, the French and British diplomats took their seats in a small reception room. Talleyrand seemed to be very interested in the topic of gas street lights and talked endlessly about the advantages of gas street lights. That's how interesting this thing is. Oh, by the way, you can't guess that after the installation of gas street lights in Paris and London, which city is the third to light up the night sky with gas street lights? It's the city of Tunisia. The lame man said proudly. Isn't it surprising? Well, after all, the threat of gangsters in Algiers is no longer a concern. So many investors are interested in the development prospects there. Tunisia. The Duke will come to Paris in person to sign a contract with the gas industry company. Ahem. The Marquis of Wellesley had to interrupt Talleyrand to continue using the gas street lamp. Your Excellency, Archbishop, you know the purpose of my visit this time. It is time for our two countries to clarify some misunderstandings. While the Algiers bandits brought disaster to Tunisia, the missile gangs in the Far East also caused considerable losses to the British East India Company. I think we should cooperate to deal with gangsters. Talleyrand smiled and waved. Thank you for your kindness, but our troops have given the Algiers and Moroccans a hard lesson, and there is no trouble in northwest Tunisia. By the way, what's the situation with the East India Company now? Wellesley sighed in his mind. Why, Moroccans are as stupid as Cornwallis. This time some gains must have been lost in order to salvage the situation in India. Indeed, the British Parliament had authorized him to make substantial concessions. He did not answer the lame man's words and instead said, Your Excellency, Archbishop, our country will condemn the gangs in Tripoli and support your country in the necessary counter-attack against them. Poor Benjia was defined as a gangster by him. The implication is to accept France's expansion of power into Tripoli. A very wise decision. Talleyrand smiled and nodded. However, the Algiers bandits also caused serious damage to our Tunisia. You know, Her Majesty the Queen has decided to declare war on Algiers. I think the UK should also express support for this action. Wellesley immediately said, no, this is not appropriate. Forget about Tripoli. The land is fertile, and he will never accept Algiers, which is nearly twice the size of Tunisia, becoming France's sphere of influence. Talleyrand interrupted him directly. As far as I know, Carnatic lost half of Tiruchirappalli 2 months ago. Maybe we can wait and see. Maybe Mysore will suddenly be inspired by God to withdraw its troops. Wellesley took a deep breath and threatened, Your Majesty the Archbishop, I heard that your country's merchant ships have frequently traveled to the Pacific Ocean recently. Perhaps they need the British Royal Navy to ensure that the waterway is open. Talleyrand naturally knew that he was threatening to attack French merchant ships. That was the fleet transporting wool from New Zealand. However, he shrugged nonchalantly. I don't know what you are talking about, but I have heard that the Russian fleet is suddenly interested in Pacific trade. That's right. The ships of Gemini Company all fly Russian flags, and most of the sailors are also Russians. Wellesley paused for a moment, then said coldly, those ports in the Pacific are equally unsafe. He is threatening to directly attack the trade nodes. Although the UK does not yet know who the French and Russian merchant ships are doing business with the strength of the Royal Fleet, they will be able to find out if they want to. I don't care. Talleyrand spread his hands. The pirates can give it a try. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince told him that the Maori people on New Zealand Island did not need French protection at all. the British would have to use at least half of the country's military strength and spend more than 5 years to capture it. Such a huge consumption is absolutely unacceptable to Britain. Wellesley repeatedly tried to confirm that the cripple was not bluffing, and he couldn't help but secretly complain in his heart. The cards in his hand had basically been played. He stood up suddenly and gritted his teeth. Archbishop, if you continue to be so aggressive, then the only thing you get is a war. Talleyrand looked at his exasperated expression and knew that he had almost touched the bottom line, so he immediately waved his hand and signaled, "Relax, my dear Marquis, at least we have to punish the Moroccan gangs entrenched in Annaba. After that, the Mysore army attacking Carnatic may really be inspired by God." Wellesley said angrily in his heart, "Damn cripple, they are Muslims, God will not pay attention to them." However, he slowly sat back in his chair. If it is limited to Annaba, maybe we can still discuss it. At 5 p.m., Wellesley returned to London with one hand covering his aching stomach and the other holding the text of the preliminary agreed non-interference treaty. He handed the document to the Parliament for review and signature with a gloomy face, but he was already thinking about what to do after resigning as the foreign minister. Yes, after taking over the mess of the Duke of Leeds, he was full of confidence and thought he could turn things around, but he found that he suffered more than his predecessor last year. The Duke of Leeds resigned because of the improper North African strategy, and he was bound to follow suit. Maybe I can go to India and tell Cornwallis how to solve the trouble there, he muttered softly. He gradually fell into a passive position after sending troops from Mysore, so he must make up for it from Mysore. Chapter 407 Queen Mary and the Dauphin. In the small theatre of the Petit Trianon Palace, Joseph unbuttoned his bulky costume, pointed to the actors reciting their lines on the stage, and said to Talleyrand, "Sorry, please speak louder. It's too noisy here. I can't hear you clearly." "Oh, okay, Your Highness." The foreign minister raised his voice hurriedly. "The British have two main demands. One is that our country will no longer provide any support to Mysore, including recalling Marquis Lafayette. Second, our country issued a statement to clarify that Britain had no involvement in the export of revolution by the southern Netherlands, as expected." Joseph nodded. "What did we gain?" Talleyrand seemed excited, took out his notes and read aloud. "First, Britain must not provide support to North African countries, including Morocco, and publicly condemn the aggression of Algiers, Morocco, and Tripoli against Tunisia. Second, Britain will recognize Tunisia, Tripoli and Annaba in Algiers as the French sphere of influence." Annaba? Joseph looked at the Archbishop with some surprise, which was not originally on his list. Talleyrand raised his chin with some pride. "I used some southern Netherlands spies in exchange, and the British quickly agreed. You did a very good job." Joseph nodded in praise. Annaba province is the only passage for Algiers to enter Tunisia, if the road in the southern desert is not counted. If it can be controlled here, the security of western Tunisia will be greatly improved. In addition, from Tunisia, this is also a bridgehead to Algiers. The Algiers guards provoked France twice, and this account must not be let go. And the area of this place is not small, almost the same as the French Montpellier province, and there is a good port. Although there is some overlap with the port of Bizet, it is better than nothing. In the future, the freight of grain sold from Algiers to France can be reduced. This is what I should do. Talleyrand bowed and gestured, and then read his war results. Third, Carnatic will remain neutral forever, and Britain will not seek an alliance with it. With the strength of Britain, the Indian princely states and their so-called alliance actually recognized Britain as their father. This means that Britain will have a gap in power in the southeast of India, leaving an opportunity for France to re-enter the Indian peninsula in the future. Pondicherry, the only foothold of France in India, is adjacent to Carnatic. Fourth, Britain will use its influence to urge Russia not to intervene in the Silesia War. This was Joseph's request, and Wellesley agreed almost without thinking. Russia is currently at war with Sweden, and has no intention of intervening in Silesia at all. But Joseph knew that Catherine II had never stopped coveting Poland. If she wanted to defeat Poland at the lowest cost, she had to win over Prussia and Austria to attack Poland at the same time, so she had to mediate the war between the two countries first. In the mediation mode, used by the Russians is, you two don't fight, otherwise I will send troops. Talleyrand closed the notebook. 5th, and the last one, Britain will reveal Oscar Paola's whereabouts to us, but he must not die in Britain. This is also Joseph's request. Oscar Paoli, the top leader of Corsican restorationism, must be dealt with as soon as possible. Point not to mention that the emperor has always regarded him as a spiritual mentor. If he wants the emperor to truly return to France, he is the biggest obstacle for the stability of the Corsica region. Getting rid of him is also a top priority. Those restorationists fight for power in the Corsican parliament under his command all day long, slander the French government everywhere, and incite Corsicans to resist national policies, making Corsica unable to develop normally. Point historically, it was only after the emperor used force to deal with the Corsican restorationists that the island gradually prospered. But that was after the emperor became the first consul and ruled France. The butt determines the head. Joseph can't give it now. If he had won the position of the first consul, he could only deal with Pauli. Point. But the British request was a bit troublesome. Pauli could not be killed in Britain. Point. This was understandable. Unlike the female swindler in the diamond necklace case, the British government handed her over to the French without hesitation. For a person with huge political influence like Pauli, the British must take into account the impact. If he died in Britain, who would dare to go to Britain to set up an exile government in the future? Being able to reveal his whereabouts was already a very big concession by the British. Point. Joseph couldn't help but narrow his eyes. Perhaps, for such a politician, social death can destroy him more than physical death. As he was thinking, the foreman of the court troop came over carefully and bowed to him. Your Highness, your Anne is here. Seeing Joseph stunned for a moment, the foreman hurriedly explained, "Oh, it's the heroine in your play." Joseph smiled awkwardly. He had forgotten that he had renamed the heroine in Breaking the Skies and Zunaziro. No, I'll come right over. Okay, Your Highness. Talleyrand quickly told the prince some details about the treaty, then said goodbye and left. Point. Joseph came to the stage of the theater and saw the troop leader pushed aside the crowd and brought a little guy who was not even as tall as Joseph's chest to him and said respectfully, "Your Highness, this is Alexandra Pavlovna who plays Anne." Joseph looked at the chubby little face and the gentle big eyes in front of him, nodded and smiled. "Hello, we meet again." Alexandra immediately lifted her skirt and knelt to him. "It's nice to meet you, Your Royal Highness the Crown Prince." "I'm glad to meet you too, Grand Duchess." A shy smile flashed across Alexandra's mouth, and she took a step closer and whispered, "Your Highness, your amusement park is simply the greatest invention in the world. I'm glad you like it." Joseph hurriedly said politely, and then looked at the troop leader suspiciously. "You mean, the Grand Duchess plays Anne?" "Ah, yes, Your Highness," the latter said with a stiff face. "Grand Duchess Alexandra is the most suitable candidate for this role." He secretly complained in his heart. This role was clearly arranged by Her Majesty the Queen herself, but Her Majesty ordered him not to tell others, so he could only take it on himself. Well, this is a brilliant idea that Queen Mary came up with for her son's love. Let all the nobles in the Palace of Versailles see with their own eyes that the Crown Prince and Alexandra perform as lovers on the stage. In this more indirect way, the nobles gradually accepted the fact that they would have a Russian Crown Princess. Queen Mary thought she was a little genius for coming up with this idea. Chapter 408 Jealous Women. When Alexandra learned that the person she was starring opposite was actually the French Crown Prince, stars suddenly flashed in her big eyes. She has always admired the Crown Prince who invented great miracles such as the merry-go-round, the Ferris wheel, and the pirate ship. He also taught a dandy like Uncle Alexei to become an accomplished gentleman, and he was so handsome. I actually got to act with him this time. It was like a dream. She hurriedly puffed out her chest and said in a childish voice, "Your Highness, please rest assured, I have learned recitation and body shaping, and I will definitely be able to play Anne well." Joseph looked at her extremely serious look and couldn't bear to hurt the little guy's enthusiasm, so he smiled and nodded and said, "I'm honored to perform on the same stage with you." He doesn't care who he plays with as long as he promotes synthetic furniture and soda drinks. Moreover, having the Russian Grand Duchess as the heroine may additionally develop the Russian market. Alexandra grinned happily when she heard this, but her expression suddenly froze. She hurriedly covered her mouth with her hands and moved aside. She turned her back and fiddled with her mouth for a while before stroking her chest and letting out a sigh of relief. It was so dangerous just now. My dentures almost fell off. She is now at the age when her teeth are changing and she has 2 gaps in her front teeth. In order to play the heroine this time, she spent a lot of money to have 2 dentures custom made. However, the craftsmanship of dentures in this era was very poor, and there was a danger of them falling off if you moved them a little too much, as I did just now. Contrary to Alexandra's happiness, the other noble ladies participating in the performance looked at the troop leader with gloomy expressions. They learned from the queen's maid that the crown prince was going to play hunter shore, so they joined the troop through the back door at all costs, just to get close to his highness by playing the heroine. Who would have thought that today a little Russian girl would appear out of nowhere and steal the heroine? And seeing that his royal highness the crown prince was quite polite to her, everyone was filled with anger. Seeing that something was wrong, the foreman of the troop hurriedly fled away with his neck scrunched up. Joseph was completely unaware of the tense atmosphere among the actresses. He was concentrating on directing several servants to move a huge ivory bookcase onto the stage. After adjusting the position of the bookcase, he picked up the script and started flipping through it. Well, something needs to be changed here. A paragraph needs to be added here. Soon, the actors all got the revised script. After reading it, all of them had strange looks on their faces. But this was changed by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, so a noble lady immediately praised loudly, "What a wonderful change. That makes the original drama shine as brightly as the sun." "That's right. Your Highness's literary talents are simply the best in Paris." "Oh, I really like this sentence, that His Highness changed. Cool down in the summer and enjoy the pleasant time. My favorite Paris Coke." Halfway through the reading, the noble lady turned to look at the people around her in surprise and whispered, "Do you know what this means?" I don't know either." Joseph hurriedly coughed and interrupted the awkward remarks of several people. "Well, let's start rehearsing once everyone has memorized the lines." On the stage, a petite figure raised the purple medicine bottle in his hand and shook it disapprovingly at the nobleman in front of him. "I have prepared a decomposition potion, and your sleeping mixture has been decomposed before it takes effect." With a look of reluctance on his face, the man opened his backpack and was about to use another potion to fight back, but suddenly he saw His Royal Highness the Crown Prince winking at him. He quickly recalled the script, quickly grabbed the glass drink bottle in the hands of the onlookers, raised his head, and took a big sip, then exaggeratedly clenched his fist and waved his elbow downward. "Coca-Cola Paris. Bring me confidence. And sooner, my level 6 alchemy will end this competition." Joseph waved to the onlookers again, asking them to give up the luxurious bookcase behind them. Although Alexandra is young, her performance is impressive, especially the part where she competes with others in alchemy. She can see duels all day long in Russia, so she can just copy the cat and the tiger. Moreover, her GG implantation part was also the most natural, because she had never read the original work and thought that the plot itself should be like this, so there was no awkward feeling at all when other actors inserted GG, so she received repeated praises from Joseph and let other actors learn the GG part from her. Several aristocratic ladies immediately rolled their eyes at the little Lolita. When Joseph was not paying attention, they used a voice that was just right for Alexandra to vaguely hear. "Oh, your Highness is just being polite to her. Look at her proud look. He's just a Russian country bumpkin. What kind of drama does he know?" "I don't know who she left to join the troupe. She must have spent a lot of money." The little lolly ignored them politely and turned around to continue rehearsing. If these people knew that she had a relationship with Her Majesty the Queen, and not only did she spend no money, but the Queen also gave her several sets of dresses for this purpose, their eyes would probably pop out of their heads. When Anshona was playing against the eldest daughter of the family, Catalina Zaro, Alexandra had just taken 2 steps forward when an aristocratic lady playing the role of a spectator next to her suddenly secretly the feet were stretched out. Alexandra was about to trip over that foot. Fortunately, she reacted very quickly When she caught a glimpse of the shadow under her feet, she immediately prepared to step over it. However, she suddenly remembered what these people had said to humiliate her. She immediately retracted her feet and stepped hard on the black figure in front of her. The red leather boots stepped hard on the ankle wrapped in stockings, causing a scream. Ah! The evil-minded female noble knelt on the ground in pain, holding her right foot, gasping for air. Several noble ladies nearby immediately surrounded her, pretending to comfort her, and then turned to Alexandra viciously. "You are really too much, Tris's foot bones may have been broken. How can you be so cruel? Look at what you have done. Please apologize to Mistress immediately." Alexandra also came over and looked carefully at the feet of the woman who plotted against her, looking relieved. "Fortunately, I'm light, otherwise you would really have broken your bones. Arian always taught me that I must maintain a dignified posture when standing. You see, if you just stretch out your feet, it is not only impolite, but also likely to be stepped on by others." Several noble ladies were stunned. They didn't expect that this Russian girl was not only not timid at all, but also could insult them so sharply. A female noble immediately looked towards Joseph and said in a tearful voice, "Your Highness, you saw it all. The Grand Duchess of Russia deliberately stepped on Tris and wanted to humiliate her." Chapter 409 Sharp Weapon of Exit. Joseph frowned immediately. Although he didn't see clearly what happened just now, Alexandra was walking well and didn't turn towards the extras. Why did she step on that person's foot? It must be that the latter stretched out her foot herself. He frowned and shook his head, ignoring the noble lady who was making trouble. "Your Highness." Several noble ladies saw that the crown prince had no intention of condemning the little Russian girl, and they couldn't quarrel with a 7 or 8-year-old child. It was probably asking for trouble. If they really quarreled, they immediately stood up angrily, helped Tris walk out of the theater, and muttered quietly, "It's impossible to perform on the same stage with such a rude woman. Let's help Tris go back to the room to rest. I will tell everyone about her rude behavior." Alexandra looked at the few people who were about to leave, knowing that they wanted to isolate herself. She blinked her eyes and chased after him. "Dear ladies, are you angry because you wanted to attract the attention of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, but failed to do so?" If an adult said this, it would sound weird, but when she said it as a child, it was innocent and sincere. You are talking nonsense." An aristocratic lady immediately denied it excitedly. "Oh, then you don't want the crown prince to notice you?" "No, no." Several female nobles' faces turned purple, and they turned around and fled the theater in a hurry. Joseph, who was watching this scene, almost laughed out loud. He thought that this little girl was quite interesting. She was not willing to give in, even when she was right. Are all Russian women so sharp? Well, it seems to be true. When Elizabeth and Catherine were Tsars, Russia was quite strong. On the contrary, when Peter III and Paul I were in power, Russia was in a mess. Alexandra sighed when she saw the women leave, turned around and bowed to Joseph, apologetically saying, "Your Highness, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have quarreled with them and prevented your rehearsal from continuing. It's not your fault." Joseph waved his hand. "You acted very well and were very brave. I'll find a way to find the missing actors." In fact, he didn't have to do anything at all. There was a long line of people who wanted to perform on the same stage with the crown prince, and rehearsals started again half an hour later. Northern suburbs of Paris. Antoine Industrial Development Zone. Yes, relying on the booming paper-making industry, Antoine's workshops and craftsmen are increasing. So Joseph simply designated this place as a new development zone. In a factory covering more than 10,000 square meters to the southwest of Antoine, Lavoisier looked at the mechanical oven spewing white smoke in front of him, hugged his wife's shoulders standing beside him, and sighed sincerely, "Dear, how did you make this thing in a month? You are really the darling of the god of chemical experiments." Miriam smiled and said, "In fact, I just made the specifications, asked someone to draw the drawings, and then handed it over to the ironworks in Saint Etienne. They took more than 20 days to manufacture it, and a lot of time was spent on testing and transportation. Their equipment and management are much better than before. I originally thought that I had to wait for help to complete the work here." Lavoisier looked at his wife lovingly. "I didn't expect you to solve it all by yourself," he said, and looked at the huge equipment in the shed: rotating furnace, centrifuge, evaporating dish, reactor, and the most complicated gas scrubber. These were basically built and tested by his wife. And before she married him, she didn't even know what chemistry was. She is definitely a genius in the field of chemical experiments. Well, of course, it is also inseparable from his excellent teaching point. After Lavoisier obtained the Royal Alkali method invented by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, it took him less than a week to complete the laboratory preparation. As long as the principle is correct, it is not difficult with his experience point. The difficulty lies in how to mass produce point in the chemical industry. Once the amount of reactants increases, the preparation process will be completely different. For example, in a test tube, you only need to shake it to mix the reacting substances evenly, but when the amount becomes 1 ton, the mixing alone can drive people crazy. Point: how to make so many materials react fully, how to purify them, and how to preserve them are all big problems. As long as any link is not up to standard, mass production cannot be carried out. Point: this is especially true for alkali production. You know, according to the requirements of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, 1.66 tons of soda is produced per day, so the mixed raw materials are several times this weight. Point: the core of this reaction is the recycling of ammonia, so there are extremely demanding requirements for the sealing of the equipment and the collection of gases, especially for the cleaning of ammonia. Ammonia is not only toxic, but also corrosive and flammable. It is very troublesome to clean up a large amount of it, which almost drove the Lavoisiers crazy. Point: in the end, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince proposed a general plan. Joseph only remembered that the gas scrubber was mentioned in the documentary, as well as the basic principle, but he didn't remember the specific details at all. And then Marion worked day and night for 3.5 months and actually designed this thing. It can be said that, as long as the confidentiality of the gas scrubber is done well, other soda preparation technical manuals will not be able to be copied, even if they are given to other countries. Lavoisier looked at the whole set of alkali making equipment in front of him, and asked his wife, "Dear, how is the trial production going? The raw material utilization rate is still a little low." His Royal Highness the Crown Prince said that it can reach about 70%, but I can only achieve 50%. Marion said, showing excitement again, but the trial production the day before yesterday took only 6 hours to produce 700 kilograms of soda, and the purity is very high. Although Lavoisier had been mentally prepared, he was still secretly shocked when he heard this number. The current market price of soda is about 33 livres per 100 kilograms. In other words, he made more than 230 livres by just starting the equipment casually the day before yesterday. Point: moreover, soda has always been a priceless thing. It is easy for you to buy dozens of kilograms, but you have to wait a long time for more than 100 kilograms. Before he could say anything, Marion smiled and said, "Dear, we don't have to save soap anymore." Among the raw materials for soap production, the most expensive are oils and soda ash. With the ability to mass produce soda ash, France can even monopolize the soap industry around the world. Point: although this thing is insignificant, if the global market is added up, it will exceed tens of millions of livres. Lavoisier nodded vigorously, and glass, paper, and dyes will become much cheaper in the future. For France, this means that the costs of these industries will be greatly reduced, thus becoming a powerful export weapon. Chapter 410: Queen Mary's Birthday Celebration. It can be said that soda ash is the source of industrial production. Historically, the industrial production of soda ash opened a new era in the chemical industry and further affected the entire industrial field. Point: in this era, France has already stood at the top of the European chemical industry with the latest achievements of Lavoisier and his wife. Mariana suddenly remembered something and turned to look at her husband. "My dear, I heard from Perna that His Royal Highness the Crown Prince mentioned that he would give you the title of Baron after the casein gum factory is officially put into operation. This kind of royal title belongs to the ranks of sword-wearing nobles and is completely different from the bought and robed nobles at the bottom of the noble chain. It is usually only used to reward a very small number of people who have made significant contributions. Lavoisier smiled and nodded. I originally wanted to give you a surprise, but I didn't expect you to be so well informed. Mariana immediately hugged his neck with joy, jumping up and down like a little girl. So, we will be what others call upper class from now on. Haha. Lavoisier smiled and said, but in this case, you will have to often socialize with the ladies in the Palace of Versailles. I'll hide in the lab and pretend I wasn't invited. Mariana blinked slyly, then hugged her husband tightly and whispered shyly into his ear. Then, do we have to solve the problem of the Baron's heir as soon as possible? Of course. Seeing that there was no one around, Lavoisier picked up his wife, lowered his head and kissed her. November 2nd, 1789. Today is Queen Mary's 34th birthday. Originally, at this time in history, Marie Antoinette and her family were leaving the Palace of Versailles under the escort of French citizens, and headed for the Tuileries Palace, which had been abandoned for many years and was in dilapidated condition. At this time, she was sitting in her dressing room, listening to the band playing, surrounded by makeup artists, hairstylists and 7 maids, happily preparing the dress for her birthday party. There was a knock on the door, and the maid came in with Brian. The chief minister bowed to Queen Mary, who was sitting in front of the mirror, and first praised, "Your Majesty, has God concentrated all the splendor and beauty of the world on you alone? You will definitely make the women of Paris breathless with envy. Well, Your Majesty, please forgive me for having to interrupt you for a moment." As he spoke, he placed a document on the small round table next to him. "This is the final revised draft of the treaty, and you need to sign it as soon as possible. As you know, it will be officially signed at the port of Le Havre in 5 days. Thank you for your compliment." Queen Mary smiled and nodded, took the quill, and signed her name at the end of the text. As for the contents inside, she had learned about it in detail from the Crown Prince a few days ago. The treaty is very beneficial to France. No, it should be said that it has made enough profits. She sighed in her heart that her son was really becoming more and more capable. This time, only a very small cost was invested in the Far East, and Britain stopped its intervention in North Africa, even getting Britain to promise to give up protection for the guy who instigated the Corsican rebellion, and some other gains she didn't quite understand. She handed the document back to Brian, looking across the busy dressing room. The smile on her face became wider. If Joseph hadn't helped him handle these government affairs, perhaps he was still discussing with ministers how to deal with the troubles in North Africa. How could he enjoy the relaxation and comfort at this time? Queen Mary watched Brian leave, gestured to the mirror, pointed to the coconut-sized golden birdcage on the side, and said to the hairstylist, "Can I put that on now?" "Of course, Your Majesty." The Queen flipped a small switch on the birdcage, and the metal nightingale in the cage fluttered its wings and poked its head out, making a chirping sound. "Ah, how perfect." The hairstylist waved the silk handkerchief and praised at the side, "His Majesty the King's hands must have been blessed by God." Yes, this wind-up birdcage hair accessory was Louis XVI's birthday gift to his wife, a lifelike mechanical bat that fully automatically rotates, opens doors, and moves its whole body, and can make more than a dozen sounds. Its complexity exceeds the most sophisticated nowadays several times the clock. Not long after, melodious and cheerful music came from the direction of Versailles Palace. Queen Mary stood up, admired her luxurious dress back and forth with satisfaction, and then headed towards the Palace Theatre with the slowly rotating birdcage on her head. While the Palace of Versailles was celebrating the Queen's birthday, the British Royal Navy's third-class battleship Ajax was sailing through the cloudy Bay of Biscay. Its destination will be the remote Indian peninsula. In an inconspicuous wardroom on the second floor of the battleship, Marquis Wellesley lit his pipe and took a strong puff. After resigning as foreign minister, he no longer had those people who were close to him, but he experienced a rare sense of tranquility. He took out the map around Mysore that he carried with him and spread it out on the table. From the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of a letter being taken out of his pocket and dropped to the ground. It was a letter from Cornwallis, the Governor General of India, which had just been sent to London the day before yesterday. It introduced the war situation in India in detail. Marquis Wellesley couldn't help but frown, feeling annoyance and anxiety filling his heart. He was reminded of the simple forts built by the Mysoreans that Cornwallis had mentioned. Before he boarded the ship, he was confident that, as long as he arrived in India, the Mysore people who had lost the support of France would soon be defeated by him. However, after a whole day of serious thinking, he finally found that there was no good way to deal with that kind of fortress. He was likely to suffer another defeat in India, England. London. Black carriage sped past on the avenue northwest of St. James's Palace. In the car, a white-haired old man in his 60s looked at the young man opposite and finally couldn't help but say, "Windham, I still think it is not a wise decision to take over as foreign secretary at this time." The young man with deep eye sockets and a Scottish look was the new British foreign secretary, Lord William Wyndham Grenville. Grenville smiled naively. "Uncle, you see, our prime minister must appease the anger of the Whigs, and I'm afraid I'm his only choice." After experiencing the strategic mistakes of the two foreign ministers, the Duke of Leeds and the Marquis of Wellesley, Pitt the younger faced huge pressure from the Whigs in the cabinet. So he prepared to appoint a Whig as the new foreign minister, to compromise with the Whigs, and he played a trick again, and chose a member of the Grenville family who had an alliance with his family, and was also his best friend, Lord Grenville. Chapter 411 Britain's New Strategy. Old Mr. Grenville sighed and continued to persuade, "But, with this mess now, you're probably going to be the scapegoat for bad situations in the future. I mean, the Marquis of Wellesley is an extremely good politician, and he's in a mess. You are right." Lord Grenville nodded seriously. "I have not been very good since I was a child. In terms of politics and strategy, I'm far behind the Marquis of Wellesley. Well, I'm also not as good as the previous foreign secretary, the Duke of Leeds." He smiled awkwardly. "To be honest, until now, I don't even quite understand what tricks the French used to defeat the Marquis of Wellesley." "Then, you still, Lord?" Grenville straightened his back and said, "But I grew up among a group of outstanding guys, so I learned a skill, which is to quickly discover the advantages of others." So what do you think has kept the French in an invincible position against the British in the past 2 years? Old Grenville was stunned, shook his head and said, "As I get older, I have long been confused about these international events." His nephew smiled and said, "Actually, I don't understand it either. But I discovered that the French have a huge advantage. That is, their international environment in the past 2 years has been really good. This allows them to rely on external forces to do anything. As for us, well, a while ago, he was questioned by the whole of Europe for encouraging the export of revolution in the southern Netherlands." If Joseph hears these words, he will definitely give Lord Grenville a thumbs up and tell him that this is the international environment that he has worked so hard to create. "Who told us to read the history books?" Old Mr. Grenville's eyes narrowed, and he nodded slowly. "Indeed. What are you going to do?" Palace of Versailles. In the spacious Palace Theatre, there was a burst of excited discussion. "Wow, it's His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. He really appears. He is so handsome. My heart almost melts. His Highness is looking at me. Have you seen it? He is looking at me. Your Highness, you are so perfect. Who can win your heart?" Joseph stepped onto the stage in a blue and white costume. He first saluted Queen Mary, today's birthday girl, and then started his performance. After this period of repeated rehearsals, he had overcome his previous embarrassment, skillfully picked up the glass bottle on the wooden table, raised his head, and took a sip, then looked at the bottle in his hand and praised, "Sure enough, you have to drink a bottle of Paris Coke to improve the efficiency of alchemy." As he finished reading his lines, several servants who had been prepared distributed exquisite glass bottles to the nobles in the front row. The person who got the bottle curiously picked it up and looked at it and saw the label Paris Coke on it and the small words Royal Designated Drink below. They realized that this was the drink that His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was drinking, and they all took off the bottle caps and tasted it. A duke couldn't help but let out a loud burp, feeling relaxed all over his body. At the same time, the sweet taste rushed to the tip of his tongue with this burp, which was wonderful. Regardless of the fact that his hiccup just seemed unsightly, he immediately took a few more gulps of Paris Coke and narrowed his eyes in comfort. This ever bubbly drink is simply amazing. He immediately decided to buy a few boxes and store them in the cellar. When he returned, the nobles in the back row who didn't get a drink stretched their necks to watch the people in front of them enjoying themselves and couldn't help but swallow hard. It's not that Joseph didn't prepare so many drinks, but it was a deliberate hunger marketing. The less you can drink, the more you will feel that it must be the most delicious thing. At the VIP table in the middle of the second floor, Louis XVI also burped and raised a glass bottle to Queen Mary next to him. "You have to try it. It amazes me how our son always comes up with these wonderful things." Immediately, Anne, played by Alexandra, appeared on the stage and went straight to Cousin Hunter, but first raised her hand to touch the tall bookshelf. The family's precious alchemical classics must be stored in bookcases made of synthetic boards so that they can be safely stored. Joseph nodded. "You are right. Synthetic board furniture is not only strong and durable and has a lifespan several times longer than ordinary wooden furniture, but it is also naturally insect proof, which can reduce the risk of classics being eaten by insects." I wonder where this novel and excellent furniture was sourced. I heard that there is a new furniture store called Livable in Paris, just southwest of the Louvre district. The nobles in the audience, who had seen this scene performed by other troops, were stunned. Why is this completely different from the previous performance? Shouldn't Annie and Hunter be discussing level 5 alchemy? Why are we talking about furniture? However, what exactly is the synthetic board furniture they are talking about? It sounds magical. London Point number 10 Downing Street. Try it. This is the best product in my collection. Little Pete handed a glass of wine to his old friend. "So, as you said, how should we break the French's diplomatic advantage?" Lord Grenville smelled the aroma of wine and smiled. "First of all, we can't be too greedy. If we want to grab everything, we will get nothing in the end. Take the southern Netherlands for example. We spent a lot of money and diplomatic resources to get it out of Austria, which was not easy to control in the end, but France got Luxembourg." Little Pete nodded thoughtfully. "Please go on, Anne." "This also pushed Austria towards France," Grenville said. "Now is the time to abandon the southern Netherlands. Austria will thank us for it and make France irrelevant. In addition, Prussia's withdrawal of troops to Silesia will put Austria under greater military pressure, and we can also take the opportunity to mediate between the two countries. Whether Austria is directed towards Serbia or Poland in the future, their dependence on France can be minimized. This is the international situation we need. A tit-for-tat duel with the French will only consume our strength. Borrowing the strength of other countries to deal with them is the right way to win. Abandoning the southern Netherlands strategy." Little Peter took a deep breath. "This will make the Whigs attack me even more fiercely. I will try my best to convince the old guys in the party." Grenville smiled and raised his glass. "When we curb the momentum of the French, they will naturally be satisfied." France Point Palace of Versailles. Louis XVI raised the glass bottle and handed it to his sweating son. "Joseph, maybe you need a bite." Queen Mary said with a smile. "Honey, you did a great job. Oh, and Alexandra is great too. You both look so perfect for each other. I mean on stage. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 412 Crown Prince Time. Joseph subconsciously looked at Alexandra, who had a lot of scenes and was still working hard on introducing a synthetic board wine cabinet on the stage, and couldn't help but smile and nod. She is really a little angel, pretty and cute, and she is very serious about her work. Well, in the entire crew, the Russian little Lala's GG implantation performance is the most natural and smooth, and he must praise her a few more times. Queen Mary heard a different meaning from his words, and quietly cast a proud glance at her husband, meaning, "What do you think? I guessed right. My son really likes the Russian Grand Duchess." Louis XVI looked at the little girl on the stage. To be honest, he was a little dissatisfied with her Russian ancestry, but when he thought of his son calling her a little angel just now, he couldn't help but soften his heart. He was also a person influenced by the Enlightenment, and his requirements for royal marriage were far less conventional than his father's. Instead, because of his love for Queen Mary, he felt that his son should also choose a girl he liked. Forget it. Joseph liked her, which was the most important thing. Louis XVI muttered to himself, at least she is a real girl, and a princess. Although Joseph had denied to his father that he liked men, Louis XVI had witnessed countless gay events in the Palace of Versailles. This was even popular among the nobles, so he was always worried about his son's orientation, and only then did he feel relieved. Louis XVI also looked at Queen Mary and nodded, expressing his approval of the Dauphin princess on the stage, and then both of them smiled with relief like aunts. After all, the Dauphin will be 16 soon, and the engagement has finally been settled. Joseph had no idea that his parents had already decided on the future Dauphin Princess of France, and that second, he was looking at Baron Terence Shaw, who was distributing soda drinks to his family's guests on the stage, and suddenly frowned slightly. Was there a little too much GG implantation? Well, a 1.5 hour play, with only 35 minutes of GG content, should be okay. However, the audience soon lost their focus due to the massive amount of GG, and the king's family also chatted in the VIP box. My dear, I really like the set of furniture you gave me. Queen Mary fed a piece of nut candy into her son's mouth, and said with a smile, "This is the best birthday gift I have received this year. Oh, of course, this gift is also very good." She pointed to her hair accessories. "Isn't it cute? This is made by your father himself." Joseph looked at the slowly rotating birdcage on his mother's head, and suddenly the mechanical nightingale inside jumped out with its wings flapping, making a chirp sound of joy. In fact, it can also play a short piece of Queen Anne's birthday ode. Louis XVI raised his head proudly. Joseph blinked and asked hesitantly, "Dear father, how long did it take you to make this hair ornament?" "Not much," Louis XVI said proudly. "Only 2.5 months. Well, plus some design time." Mr. Florent said that, even if he did it, it couldn't be more. Joseph couldn't help but hold his forehead when he heard this, thinking that it was no wonder that the development of the new rifled gun had been silent. "You must have been tinkering with bird cages recently." Forget it. He shook his head silently again. After all, his father didn't get paid, so he could arrange his working time as he pleased. But he still had to remind him from time to time in the future. The birthday celebration of Queen Mary ended with laughter and joy, and then soda drinks became hot sellers throughout Paris, even though the price of a bottle was as high as 6 livres. There was also a queue of hundreds of meters in front of the livable furniture store in the Louvre area, but what Joseph didn't expect was that the GG implant he made on the Queen's birthday caused a very bad impact. As usual, major theaters in Paris followed the example of the court troupe and began to mix soft GG into their plays. Of course, this is also because the GG implantation brought them a lot of profits, so they could no longer give it up. At the corner of Richelieu Street, the Comédie Française was performing The Marriage of Figaro. A couple saw the actors on the stage start to mention the original Elegance perfume shop and immediately looked at each other. The man whispered, "It seems that it's Prince's time. We can go for a cup of coffee first, okay?" Dear, well, the French audience naturally hated soft GG, and after tracing the source, they learned that this was the first thing His Royal Highness the Crown Prince came up with. So Prince's time naturally became a synonym for GG implantation. Brussels, in the Parliament building, Carol II looked at the British court messenger angrily, but when he remembered the autograph of George III on the letter on the table, he could only sigh. "Please tell His Majesty that I will lead the army back to Hanover as soon as possible." Although he was the governor of Hanover, he was more of a tool of George III, so when the King of England asked him to stop supporting the rebels in the southern Netherlands, he had no choice but to obey. After the messenger left, Carol II looked at the faint smoke in the distance, and a sense of relief inexplicably surged in his heart. In fact, deep in his heart, he had already determined that it was impossible for him to defeat the French troops on the opposite side. It was just that the shame of being captured made him unable to face this retreat. The King of England's order just now helped him solve this problem. Alas, for the sake of loyalty to His Majesty, I can only endure this humiliation temporarily. He muttered to himself as he walked towards the gate and waved to the herald. "Order me to link to lead 2 regiments to guard the southern line, and the other troops will immediately gather in the northern suburbs of Brussels." Yes, Marshal van Dernet and the southern Netherlands parliamentarians soon learned of the abnormal mobilization of the Hanoverian army. Although they were surprised, they only went to ask Charles II about the situation. At this time, Charles II had already walked to a place 50 miles away from Brussels under the escort of the guard. Van Dernet and others had not yet realized that they had been sold as commodities. On the one hand, they hurriedly organized the Southern Netherlands National Guard to take over the defense of Brussels, and on the other hand, they asked for help from the Prussian army in Liege, Potsdam, the administrative center of Prussia. And Southsea Palace. William II frowned and said, "This means that our huge investment in the Southern Netherlands will be in vain." British Foreign Minister Lord Grenville smiled simply. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, the issue you should be most concerned about right now is how to end the war in Silesia as soon as possible. If the news I received is true, Prussia's finances should be very tight, right?" Chapter 413 Withdrawal. William II's brows furrowed even more. The British were right. Although Prussia survived last year's drought due to the large-scale planting of potatoes, the poor harvest still dealt a heavy blow to the national economy. Then Prussia was soon involved in the Brabant Uprising and the Silesian War, and the treasury lost funds rapidly like a flood. If the current situation continues, the national finances may collapse by March next year, and ending the war in the southern Netherlands can indeed alleviate financial pressure. Lord Grenville continued. In addition, transferring General Blücher to Silesia can also change the balance of forces there. Seeing the Prussian king nod subconsciously, he immediately threw out another bait. "In order to dispel your concerns, the Bank of England will provide you with a loan of £700,000 to help you win the Silesian War." He knew that the Prussians were worried that Britain and Austria would collude and sell out Prussia's interests, so he had to show his support for the latter's war in Silesia. William II's eyes suddenly lit up. £700,000 is 7 million florins. This money is enough for his army to fight until October next year. By then, the autumn harvest has already begun, and the finances can continue. But he was still quite hesitant. "But this will also allow Austria to regain the southern Netherlands," Grenville said. "It will also make them lose France. You may know that the Austrians have always been wary of France's interference in the southern Netherlands. The end of the rebellion there means that the French have lost their value to them. Of course, we will also exert some influence in Vienna to divide France and Austria." After hearing this, William II finally nodded and fell into deep thought. Austria, Vienna. In a villa on the west side of Schönbrunn Palace, Count Franz hurriedly drove all the servants out, carefully closed the door, and then looked nervously at the middle-aged officer standing beside him. "Is what you said really reliable?" He knew that this officer was ostensibly affiliated with the garrison stationed in Vienna, but in fact he was the British ambassador to Austria. The officer nodded immediately. "Yes, Count, this is a joint agreement between Lord Grenville and His Majesty William II." Franz's face changed, which meant that Britain and Prussia had just given up on the insurgents in the southern Netherlands. He pondered and asked, "Then why did His Excellency ask you to tell me this?" "You know, the Hanoverian army can only leave after the French army withdraws from the southern Netherlands," the officer said. "This is to ensure that Brussels will not fall into the hands of the French." "Yes, you are right." Franz rubbed his hands excitedly. If the emperor took back the southern Netherlands after his advice at Schönbrunn Palace, he would be able to rise to prominence in the future. He immediately thought of another question. "But Kaunitz and his group will definitely advise His Majesty against my proposal." Kaunitz is a representative of the pro-French faction in Austria. He has always supported the strengthening of cooperation between France and Austria, and naturally would not agree to let the French withdraw from the southern Netherlands. The officer smiled. "Marshal Lacy and General Wurmser will stand on your side, and we will cause some trouble for Kaunitz." Lacy has considerable power in Austrian politics, and is also the commander-in-chief of the Silesia battlefield. His opinions are at least as important as those of Secretary of State Kaunitz, and Wurmser's influence is also not small. With the endorsement of the two of them, Ferencz's confidence suddenly increased. The British insider continued, the most important thing is that this may end the war in Silesia. After he told Ferenczi, the latter immediately nodded excitedly. Please tell Lord Grenville that I will definitely persuade His Majesty to let the French get out. Paris Versailles, Petit Trianon. Queen Mary looked at the trembling handwriting on the letter in her hand, and her eyes instantly became moist. Madame Delvaux, you are so cheerful and healthy in my memory, but how come? She choked a little, took a deep breath, put the letter aside, and made a cross on her chest. May God bless you, Madame. Delvaux was her wet nurse, and one of the closest people to her, before she got married. In that letter, the old lady told her that her health was not very good, and the doctor said that she might be called by God at any time. The old lady said that she didn't want to disturb Her Majesty the Queen because of these little things, but her only granddaughter made her really worried, so she had to write this letter. Queen Mary thought for a while, turned around and told the maid, de Bernenac, please invite the Crown Prince. Yes, Your Majesty. Joseph happened to be in the office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Palace of Versailles at this time, discussing something with Talleyrand. According to the news sent by the Intelligence Bureau and the ambassador to Austria, Vienna has probably decided to evacuate us from the southern Netherlands. Talleyrand frowned and pondered. With the strength of Austrian troops in the Low Countries, it is already very difficult to deal with Blücher's corps. Once we leave, the Brabant rebels will immediately occupy the entire southern Netherlands and declare independence. Joseph nodded. This is too unusual. Maybe I have to go to Vienna with you. Just yesterday afternoon, the Palace of Versailles received a note from Austria, inviting French diplomats to Vienna for a meeting. As it happened suddenly, Talleyrand immediately rushed to the Tuileries Palace to report the matter to the Crown Prince. While the two were discussing, the Queen's maid knocked on the door and bowed to Joseph. Your Highness, Her Majesty the Queen invites you to her. Oh, is there anything for your mother? Joseph stood up, motioned Talleyrand to wait, and went to the Petit Trianon Palace with Countess de Bernenac. It seems to be related to the letter from Madame Delvaux. The maid tilted her head and said, after reading the letter, His Majesty became a little depressed. Joseph nodded. Madame Delvaux was able to write directly to her mother, and it seemed that she had a very unusual relationship with her mother in this era. Not everyone has the right to send private letters to the royal family. You know, even if Catherine II's illegitimate daughter wanted to write a letter to her, it had to be forwarded by Potemkin's old subordinates before it could be delivered to the Tsar. Soon, Joseph walked into Queen Mary's bedroom, bowed, and before he could speak, he saw his mother's tears falling. He hurried forward and took the Queen's hand and asked with concern, Mother, what's wrong with you, dear? I hope you can go to Vienna for me. Queen Mary tried to stop sniffling, looked up at him and said, Madame Delvaux is my wet nurse, who has been taking care of me since I was a child, and now she is in trouble. Chapter 414 Austria's Best Diplomat. Joseph nodded immediately and said, okay, I can go anywhere, as long as I can make you feel at ease. Coincidentally, even without Queen Mary's order, he was preparing to go to Vienna. He looked at his mother again. Mother, what happened to make you so worried? Alas, I have been taken care of by Madame Delvaux since the moment I was born. Queen Mary wiped her tears with a handkerchief and choked. She gave me meticulous care. According to the tradition of European nobles in the 18th century, children would be given to wet nurses to feed as soon as they were born. Queen Mary's mother, the previous Austrian ruler Maria I, gave birth to 7 children who were raised by the wet nurse plus tutor model. So for Queen Mary, Madame Delvaux was almost her mother in her childhood, and the relationship between them was very deep. It was precisely because Queen Mary lacked maternal care since childhood that she did not want her children to experience such pain. Therefore, she admired Rousseau's advocacy of following the natural way. Mothers should feed their children themselves, and was also the first mother in the European royal family to practice this concept. After her, feeding children by themselves gradually became popular among French women. By the way, Rousseau promoted the concept of mothers raising children themselves throughout his life, but threw all his 5 children into an orphanage. His wife the Tsar was still alive, because he believed that he was absolutely free. Mrs. Delvaux wrote that her health was very bad, and she had a little granddaughter, the poor child's parents died of fever when she was very young, and she grew up with Mrs. Delvaux, Queen. Mary talked about some things about Mrs. Delvaux's granddaughter, and finally said, when the child grew up, she was even more beautiful than her grandmother, and many young nobles pursued her, and that beauty also brought her trouble. A year ago, a scoundrel named Walter began to harass her. Even though she refused many times, she was still harassed by him. Joseph frowned and said, doesn't the sheriff of Vienna care about this? The sheriff dare not provoke that Baron Walter. Queen Mary looked at Mrs. Delvaux's letter. He is the cousin of the Grand Duchess of Tuscany, Maria Vitaluca. Joseph was stunned for a moment before he connected this name with the corresponding identity, Leopold II's brother-in-law. No one dared to provoke that baron. Leopold II was about to be crowned the Holy Roman Emperor. Queen Mary continued, Baron Walter has a very bad reputation. Madame Delvaux is worried that no one in Vienna dares to take care of him, so she hopes that Camelia, oh, her little granddaughter, can come to Paris and I will provide her with shelter. No, I can't leave the Palace of Versailles easily, so I hope you can go to Vienna and send my blessings to Madame Delvaux on my behalf and bring back poor Camelia. Well, don't worry, I will take care of these things. Joseph nodded seriously. Half a month later, Vienna, Schönbrunn Palace Point, accompanied by the solemn music played by the band. Joseph, accompanied by Leopold II, walked between the guards of honor standing on both sides of the road. I didn't expect you to come in person. Leopold II seemed quite enthusiastic and gestured in the direction of the main entrance of Schönbrunn Palace. I have prepared a grand dinner for you. Joseph thanked him politely, and after a few more pleasantries, he turned the topic to business. Uncle, you urgently summoned Archbishop Talleyrand this time. Is there something important? Leopold II smiled politely. Haha, over the past 6 months, France has given great support to our country on the battlefields of Silesia and the southern Netherlands. Your Majesty asked me to express my sincere gratitude to France. Joseph muttered to himself, if he wanted to express his gratitude, he could just give some florins. Why summon the French foreign minister? As the dinner continued, Leopold II suddenly raised his glass and said loudly to everyone present, with the help of French allies, General Leo has won a decisive victory in the southern Netherlands. I believe that it will not be long before the rebels will be eliminated and the southern Netherlands will regain order. He smiled and gestured to Joseph, and the brave French soldiers will soon be able to return to their long-missed hometown. Joseph smiled and raised his glass in response to the cheers of the Austrian nobles, but frowned in his heart. Leopold II seemed very sure that the rebels in the southern Netherlands would be defeated, but he didn't get any reports from the front line at all. Except for the Hanover Army's rotation of defense a while ago, no decisive battle had taken place. Leopold II continued to speak passionately. In Silesia, our army severely taught the Prussians a lesson. In several battles in Liegnitz, Marshal Lacy annihilated nearly 10,000 Prussian invaders. His cannons almost turned the enemy's positions into scorched earth. The Austrian nobles immediately cheered again. Long live His Majesty the Emperor. Marshal Lacy leads us to victory. Cheers to the warriors on the Silesia front. Joseph was immediately more confused. Austria clearly did not make any progress in Silesia, so why did Leopold II talk about it as if it was going to triumph? In this way, the banquet ended in an atmosphere of excitement and joy, followed by a dance. It was not until 11 o'clock in the evening that Joseph was finally able to return to his room. Not long after, Talleyrand knocked on the door and came in, hurriedly bowed, and said solemnly, Your Highness, the situation does not seem good. Count Cornitz wants to see you immediately. Joseph nodded, signaled Eamon to change into casual clothes for him, and followed the 2 servants who had been waiting outside the house, and left Schönbrunn Palace quickly. In the carriage, Talleyrand frowned and reported, Your Highness, according to the news I heard in Vienna, Karl II may withdraw to Hanover soon, and the Prussians will also announce that they will no longer intervene in the situation in the southern Netherlands. Joseph was surprised and said, How is this possible? It is said that Count Franz was the leader and persuaded Karl II and William II through very small interests. Talleyrand said, he was also awarded by His Majesty Joseph II not long ago. Joseph Sneered. If Karl II could be persuaded through diplomatic means, Prussia was in a war with Austria, how could it be possible to easily reconcile with the southern Netherlands? What do you think? He looked at Talleyrand. It's definitely not Count Franz. There must be someone else behind the scenes. But if it's true as the rumors say, our military presence in the southern Netherlands will become extremely passive. Chapter 415 Armistice Agreement. If Han and Prussia had not intervened in the affairs of the southern Netherlands, Van der Noort's rebel army would have been quickly wiped out by the Austrian army. By that time, the French army had lost its reason to stay in the southern Netherlands. Unless he stays there with a shameful face and refuses to leave, in that case, he will immediately become enemies with Austria. France is in great need of coal resources in Wallonia and has invested huge sums of money there, so it must not just leave. While he was thinking about it, the carriage stopped, and the two servants leading the way bowed and gestured to the small villa not far away. My lord, that's where it is. Joseph came to the villa under the protection of Kesode, and immediately saw an old man coming out with an anxious face, stroking his chest and saluting. I'm glad that you can come in person, Your Highness the Crown Prince. It was none other than the Austrian Minister of State, Count Wenzel-Lanton von Kaunitz. Kaunitz let Joseph into the room, closed the door with his own hands, and immediately said urgently, Your Highness, Theo's alliance is facing a huge crisis. Joseph knew that the old man was a famous Jingfer, so he asked directly, you mean that Hanover and Prussia are about to withdraw their troops from the southern Netherlands? Kaunitz nodded, but immediately shook his head. The two countries will indeed give up supporting the southern Netherlands rebels, but more importantly, His Majesty the Emperor has decided to sign an armistice agreement with Prussia later. Joseph's pupils shrank. The armistice agreement? You mean the armistice in Silesia? That's it? Kaunitz said. Count Franz did not know what means he used. He only spent 300,000 florins to make Karl II and William II withdraw from the southern Netherlands. Then, he suggested to His Majesty the Emperor that the original purpose of the Silesian War was to hedge against Prussia's interference in the southern Netherlands. Now that the southern Netherlands rebellion is about to end, it will become necessary to continue the stalemate in Silesia. Meaningless. Joseph frowned slightly. This Ferenc was quite capable. He had used the Brabant uprising to suggest Joseph II to recover Silesia, but at this time he used it as a reason to end the war. He looked at the Austrian Minister of State. Then His Majesty the Emperor agrees. Kaunitz nodded. To tell you the truth, Austria's financial situation is not optimistic. Fighting on two fronts in the southern Netherlands and Silesia, military expenditures are very high. In fact, His Majesty Leopold II once even suggested that His Majesty the Emperor temporarily suspend reforms due to financial problems. In addition, there are rumors that the Hungarian nobles are plotting a rebellion in order to resist the war tax. This has also made His Majesty determined to stop the war as soon as possible. Joseph's brows suddenly furrowed even more tightly. If the war in Silesia stops, then Prussia and Austria are likely to turn their attention to Poland in the east again, and then use Russia to pull the strings to start a copy of the partition of Poland. The interests of Russia and Russia are becoming more aligned, and eventually some kind of alliance will be formed, and history will return to its original trajectory. Kaunitz seemed more anxious than him. If Silesia cannot be recaptured this time, Austria will probably lose it forever. Kaunitz's core strategic proposition was to join France to resist Prussia, and devoted his life to defeating Prussia and making Austria the master of Germany again. If Austria's all-out attack ended hastily like this, Prussia's prestige would definitely increase, which he would never accept. Joseph knew he was right. Historically, Austria's national power would continue to weaken since Joseph II, and indeed it would never be able to regain Silesia. He nodded and said, so, what suggestions do you have? Kaunitz looked pleading. If France can provide more support, such as more troops and some loans, I'm confident that we can unite with the ministers who are tough on Prussia and persuade His Majesty to continue attacking Silesia. Joseph narrowed his eyes when he heard this. Does this mean that he wants me to withdraw from the southern Netherlands and continue to send people and money to help Austria fight Silesia? Do you always think I look like someone who has been taken advantage of? Conquering Silesia would not contribute the slightest benefit to France. Besides, with France's current financial situation, where will the money come from to provide loans to Austria, etc. He suddenly remembered that Kaunitz had just mentioned the minister who was tough on Prussia, so he looked at the old minister of state and said, "Are there many supporters in Vienna for a war against Prussia?" "Of course." Kaunitz nodded vigorously. "People can never forget the shame of Silesia. Everyone is worried that His Majesty will negotiate peace with Prussia." He said that he wanted to wash away the shame. In fact, the Austrian bourgeoisie could not let go of Silesia, a region with developed industry and strong consumption power. Joseph nodded, a smile flashing in his eyes. Political correctness is a powerful weapon at any time. In Austria, recovering Silesia is the greatest political correctness. Although the upper echelons of Vienna were physically and mentally exhausted due to the stalemate war and financial constraints, and had thoughts of retreating, if they were given a huge stimulus, this political correctness would be activated immediately. By that time, even the HRE emperor could not go against the trend and negotiate peace with Prussia. He said to Kaunitz, "Please rest assured that our country will continue to provide support for the war in Silesia. At the same time, I will never sit back and watch Austria bow to Prussia. Thank you. Austria will always remember your help." Joseph continued, "In addition, I hope you can do something for me. I am willing to serve you at any time. I need you to cooperate in some ways in Schönbrunn Palace." After leaving Kaunitz's villa, Joseph immediately went to the French embassy in Austria and summoned the French ambassador to Austria, Baron Alphonse. "Your Highness, it is indeed difficult to bypass the news review in Vienna." Alphonse frowned, "But I will try my best." Joseph nodded and said, "The intelligence bureau will fully cooperate with you. In addition, if there are any difficult problems, you can ask Count Kaunitz for help. I hope to see the news in the newspaper within a week." "Yes, Your Highness." The next morning, Joseph first told Talleyrand to visit those ministers who advocated a tough stance against Prussia, while he went to Madame Delvaux's residence. According to the address left by his mother, it was a small, but rather unique manor, which showed that the French queen's wet nurse lived a pretty good life. In fact, the old lady was also somewhat famous in Vienna. If Leopold II's brother-in-law was not really to be trifled with, she would never have asked Queen Mary for help. The people of the Delvaux family had long been alarmed by the luxurious scene outside the door and the large group of guards in white uniforms. 7 or 8 servants immediately came out to greet them. When they learned that the person coming was the French crown prince, a maid hurriedly turned around and ran back to the house, shouting, "Miss, come here quickly. It's the French queen." An old man who looked like a butler scolded the servants to make way, and then lowered his head very nervously and invited Joseph into the manor. Chapter 416 Flowers of Vienna. Joseph walked through the neatly maintained courtyard and saw the gate of the villa being pushed open from the inside. A girl in a white dress ran out. Because she was in a hurry, her long golden curly hair swayed slightly behind her like waves. The girl kept her head down nervously and almost bumped into Xode. "Please forgive me, I really didn't mean it." She hurriedly knelt down to apologize to the captain of the guard. After receiving the latter's forgiveness, she carefully glanced at the crowd. Suddenly she remembered something, straightened her back, and came to the handsome boy in the sapphire blue coat with a very even pace, kneeling down and saluting with very standard court etiquette. "It's a great honor for you to come here, Your Royal Highness the Crown Prince." She was not very proficient in French, and had a German accent. After a pause, she seemed to react. I'm Camelia Erminie Delvaux. It's a great honor for you to come." Joseph saw the girl's face. She was about 16 or 17 years old, with a soft face and delicate skin like a baby. Her big violet eyes were full of nervousness and anxiety, and her lips were slightly moving, as if she wanted to say something else, which made people want to protect her. Joseph had seen many beauties of various types in the Palace of Versailles, but he was still surprised by Camelia's appearance at this time, and he couldn't help but be slightly stunned. Ahem. He hurriedly used a dry cough to cover up the embarrassment, nodded to the girl in return, and asked, "I'm here to visit Mrs. Delvaux. Is she feeling better?" Camelia's expression suddenly dimmed when she heard this, and whispered, "Grandma is not in a good condition." "Oh, please come in." The bedroom on the second floor of the villa facing the sun. The old woman with silver hair was lying on the bed, her eyes closed, and her breathing was so light that it was almost unnoticeable. When Joseph entered the room, a maid from the Delvaux family hurried to the bed and whispered a few words in the old lady's ear. The wrinkled eyelid slowly opened. The old man tried to turn his head, and a vague voice came out of his throat. "Is it the Crown Prince? His Highness?" "Yes, madam." The old lady immediately opened her eyes with force and pulled the maid with her skinny arms, struggling to sit up, and a line of turbid tears was about to flow out of her eyes. "Her Majesty the Queen. She is still thinking about me." Joseph hurried forward to support her. "Lie down quickly. My mother really wants to visit you, but she really can't leave Paris, so she asked me to do it for you. She conveys her most sincere blessings to you." Woo woo. Mrs. Delvaux suddenly burst into tears. I also miss Her Majesty the Queen very much." After crying for a while, she looked at Joseph and struggled to salute. "You see, I am really old and confused. Honorable Crown Prince, Your Highness, you don't have to be polite. Take care of your body." Joseph helped her lean on the pillow, but found that the old lady was so tired that she couldn't open her eyes because of the tossing just now. He turned his head to look at Camelia. "What did the doctor say?" The girl whispered. "Drive Rich to just bled grandma this morning and said that if there is no improvement, vomiting treatment may be required in the afternoon." Joseph's face was full of black lines. The old lady was like this, and the quack doctor actually wanted to bleed her. Forget it. In this era, even President Washington can't escape the blood loss debuff, not to mention an ordinary noble old lady in Vienna. Mrs. Delvaux rested for a while and smiled as she talked about some things about Queen Mary's childhood. Joseph couldn't bear to interrupt the old lady's beautiful memories, so he sat by the bed and listened quietly. At noon, Dr. Richter came. After examining the old lady, he looked at the young man next to him who was obviously of extraordinary status with some nervousness, and then whispered to Camelia, "Alas, Mrs. Delvaux's condition should not require emetic treatment. What she needs is a priest. May God have mercy on her." After the doctor left, Camelia couldn't help wiping away tears, but Mrs. Delvaux smiled and comforted her. "Grandma is very good." "Oh, no need for that. Damn. Emetic. How good. Go and ask Father Koch to come." She seemed to suddenly remember something, looked at the French crown prince, and was about to get up again. Joseph had to help her lie back on the bed again. "Do you have something to tell me?" The old lady nodded weakly. "Your Highness, there is a devil named Walter. Joseph finally understood what happened in Madame Delvaux's intermittent narration. This Baron Walter detained and raped many women in Spain and caused the death of 2 of them, which angered the important minister Campus. He had no choice but to flee to Tuscany 7 years ago to seek refuge with his cousin Ludovica. Then he followed her to Austria. Walter was still flirting with women everywhere in Vienna until he saw Camelia at a ball one time and immediately fell in love with her beauty and threatened to marry her after hearing about this guy's bad character. Madame Delvaux flatly refused the marriage, and then he was constantly harassed by her. Camelia was so scared that she almost dared not go out during this year. Fortunately, Madame Delvaux still had some reputation, so Walter did not dare to come to her house to rob her. "When I go to see Got," Mrs. Delvaux continued with difficulty, "that bastard will no longer have any scruples." Joseph could not help but frown. He had already inquired about the situation of the Delvaux family, and they had few relatives in Vienna. After the old lady died, Camelia, a little girl, would most likely not escape Walter's clutches. Madame Delvaux motioned her granddaughter to come over, held her hand, and then carefully pulled Joseph's sleeve, put her granddaughter's hand into his hand, and begged, "Prince, Your Highness, please, for the sake of Her Majesty the Queen, you must take Camelia away from Vienna. Keep her away from that devil." Joseph looked at the old lady's pale face, immediately held Camelia's slender and cold hand, and nodded. "Please rest assured, I promise no one will dare to hurt your granddaughter. She will live well in Paris. Thank you so much, Your Highness. May God bless you." Madame Delvaux said, and cried again, but her expression seemed to be relieved. Soon, the old man fell asleep tiredly. After comforting Camelia, Joseph agreed to visit the old lady again tomorrow, and then left the manor. Chapter 417 Public Opinion War in Austria. Second floor of Schönbrunn Palace. Austrian Foreign Minister Baron Turgot sent Talleyrand out of the hall with a smile on his face. That's about it, Archbishop Talleyrand. The formal note will be sent to Paris next week. Thank you France for its outstanding contribution to defeating the rebels in the southern Netherlands. Oh, His Majesty the Emperor also specially ordered that a banquet be held in Brussels to send off the French warriors. The rest will be left to General Leo. Talleyrand nodded calmly. Please thank His Majesty for your arrangement on my behalf. Long live the Franco-Austrian alliance. Long live the Franco-Austrian alliance. When Talleyrand walked out of the main entrance of Schönbrunn Palace, his face immediately became gloomy. He took out his notebook and flipped through it. He looked at the line on it and said to the valet, "Go to 31 Usburg Street." That was the residence of Baron Ferrari. Although he was a staunch anti-Prussian, his influence was not great. However, Talleyrand has met with all the anti-Prussian leaders in the past few days, and all he can do now is to unite with as many anti-Prussian ministers as possible. At the same time, in the VIP room of the Red Boot, the most luxurious technical institute in Vienna, Viscount Marta, a senior official of the Vienna secret police who had just enjoyed the ecstasy service, picked up a glass of gin. This kind of spiked wine. It is said to have the effect of aphrodisiac. He drunkenly squinted his eyes and signaled to the fat man opposite, "Today has really cost you money, Mr. Cudgel, so don't worry about that." What Mr. Cudgel ordered was a top-notch package of 80 florins a day. Even Viscount Malt would not be willing to spend this. "Thank you so much, my dearest friend." Cudgel raised his glass to Miss Alina. That was the technician who served Malt just now. The two drank it all in one gulp. Malt had obviously drunk too much, but his eyes suddenly focused. He sat up straight, patted his forehead and said, "I almost forgot. I haven't signed the review authorization yet." Press censorship in Austria is handled by the secret police, and he is the top official in charge of press censorship. He pulled up his messy clothes, staggered to the door, and shouted toward the VIP room, "Eric, bring me my briefcase." Soon, Malt handed the signed authorization letter to his entourage and ordered, "Go back to the office immediately and give this to Harper." "Yes, sir." Eric took out his red boots and waved to the carriage parked across the street. He didn't dare to use the Viscount's car casually. "Graben Street." "Okay, sir." The coachman responded, waving his whip to drive the animals. However, the car only walked less than 1 kilometer in the direction of Graben Street before it suddenly turned into a remote narrow alley. Erich suddenly felt that the car stopped. He was about to ask the driver when the car door was suddenly opened. 2 masked strong men dragged him out of the car and said in a deep voice, "Robbery, let me go. I'm a secret police officer." As soon as Erich was halfway through speaking, he was knocked unconscious with a stick. A masked man opened his wallet, took out the authorization document inside, and handed it to the short man next to him. "Mr. Baudouin, this should be it." The latter immediately lay down on the wooden table of the carriage and began to carefully copy the signature on the authorization letter. More than 10 minutes later, he handed a note with Marta's signature to the strong man. "That's it." The latter looked at the note, put it away carefully, and then tore the authorization letter into pieces in a 3-story building on the south side of Graben Street. A large number of people from the newspaper office huddled together and were anxiously shouting to the uniformed people behind the desk, "Sir, when will Viscount Marv come back? It's already past 4 p.m. If we don't review it, it will be too late for printing. Please tell us where Viscount Malt is, and we will invite him back ourselves." "Yes, this is Austria's news censorship agency, and Mart, the censorship chief, is still discussing life with the technical girl in red boots. Please be quiet, everyone." A square-faced secret police officer shouted impatiently, waving his hand pointy as Mart's assistant Harper, the deputy official responsible for news review, but without Mart's authorization document, he cannot conduct censorship work. However, the authorization document had already been torn up by agents of the French intelligence service and thrown into the trash. At this moment, a middle-aged man with an unattractive appearance, wearing a felt hat, squeezed through the crowd and winked at the square-faced official. Harper understood and led him into the office on the second floor. After closing the door, the man in the felt hat took out a piece of paper and handed it to Harper. "Sir, this is specially approved by Viscount Mout. Please excuse me." The latter took the note and looked at it and saw that it read, "I have read the content submitted for review by Life and Pravda today. Please approve it." Behind it is the signature of Viscount Mout, but there is no personal seal. He frowned and looked at the man in the felt hat. "Where is the Viscount?" The latter showed a mysterious smile. "I'm with a certain lady. Do you need a specific address?" "Ahem, no need." Harper waved his hand, but still said cautiously, "Show me your manuscript." "Okay, sir." The man in the felt hat hurriedly handed him a pile of manuscripts. Harper turned a page, and the top title was "Great Victory at Liegnitz. Prussian Bandits Defeated." He was not surprised. There were rumors in the past 2 days that Marshal Lacy had won a victory in Silesia, and Liegnitz was the southwestern province of Silesia. The man in the felt hat immediately added, "Our war correspondent just sent back the news at noon, and the official announcement should be issued tomorrow. Our newspaper must rely on this to become a first-class newspaper. You reporters are faster than the Marshal's messenger." Harper smiled and looked down. The news release said that the Austrian army annihilated 4,000 Prussian troops at Liegnitz, captured 1,000 prisoners, and seized a large number of artillery. The front line has been pushed to the northeast of Liegnitz. According to the current situation, Liegnitz may be recaptured within this month. It's really big news. He was also quite excited. "Finally, we've taught the damn Prussians a lesson." The man in the felt hat immediately took out 10 florins and stuffed them into his pocket. "Sir, please hurry up." Soon, he came out of the secret police building, followed by a dozen people from other newspapers. "Are you really willing to sell the news to us?" one of them asked anxiously. "Of course, no. News from any newspaper was approved today, except for the manuscripts from Life and Truth." And just now, the people from Life and Truth told them that they could sell the news to them for only 30 florins each. Although there will definitely be a lot of similar news at that time, it is better than compensating customers for suspension of publication and causing adverse effects on the reputation of the newspaper. That afternoon, nearly half of the newspapers in Vienna were printing the news of the great victory of Liegnitz, the defeat of the Prussian bandits. The next morning, the whole of Vienna was in an uproar. Chapter 418 Difficulties in transitioning from luxury to frugality. Long live His Majesty the Emperor. Silesia will always belong to Austria. Destroy the Prussian bandits, and the glory of His Majesty the Emperor will surely shine on Silesia. Crown King of Silesia. Outside the Schönbrunn Palace Square, waves of excited cheers entered the conference hall on the second floor. Leopold II, who was discussing the armistice plan with Count Ferenc and Baron Turgot, frowned. He took a few steps to the window and saw a dark crowd surging towards Schönbrunn Palace in the distance. He turned to look at the attendant on the side. "What are they shouting? What happened?" The latter hurriedly went out to inquire and soon returned with a guard officer, bowing and saying, "Your Majesty, it seems that people are celebrating a great victory." "A great victory? What great victory?" The officer immediately said, "Your Majesty, there is news that Marshal Lacy defeated the Prussians in Liegnitz and advanced the front to the southwest of Breslau." Turgot almost couldn't help laughing and hurriedly lowered his head while holding his breath. Breslau is located in the hinterland of Silesia and is the capital of Silesia. At present, the Austrian army is blocked at the Liegnitz border and cannot move forward. The person who spread the rumors did not use his brain and directly helped Lacy sweep through the entire province. Leopold II rolled his eyes at the foreign minister and said angrily, "I didn't pay attention to those rumors at first, but I didn't expect that some people would believe them." Hearing the cheers getting louder and louder, he said to the officer irritably, "What are you still doing standing here? sent someone immediately to refute the rumors and disperse the crowd. Of course, the rumor of the so-called victory of Liegnitz was spread by Joseph, the ambassador to Austria, Baron Alphonse. But this is just an appetizer in Schönbrunn Palace. Baron Farrari, the staunch anti-Prussian minister, was waving the Vienna Daily News in his hand, standing on the stairs and shouting, "Great victory! Silesia has never been so close to its return." He distributed the newspaper to the dozens of nobles in front of him. "Look, it's all written in the newspaper. Oh, I suggest that everyone donate to Marshal Lacy's army. I will donate 300 florins first." The nobles immediately flipped through the newspapers and talked excitedly. "Marshal Lacy is so awesome. He killed 4,000 Prussian dogs. We really won the battle. Great." And those nobles who had watched the news this morning were already asking their servants to pay for Silesia. "I will also donate 300 florins. I donate 500 florins to the warriors of Liegnitz." In this era without the internet, newspapers are people's most authoritative source of information. Especially for such major events, no one will doubt it at all. After all, the secret police will strictly review every word point in fact, let alone the end of the 18th century. Even in the early 20th century, courts would even use the contents of newspapers as evidence to make judgments under Ferrari's vigorous publicity. Schönbrunn Palace soon became excited. Although those nobles with military background were skeptical about the news, no one dared to say a word of doubt at this time. They would probably be beaten up by the fanatical people. The officer who went to refute the rumor was about to take the order and go out, but Baron Turgot suddenly thought of something, frowned and stopped him, then leaned close to Leopold II and whispered, "Your Majesty, I'm afraid it is not appropriate to directly refute the rumor now." "Oh, why? Think about it. What would Baron Duden say to those people outside?" Leopold II hesitated and immediately frowned. "Yes, what should I say? The great victory is all a rumor, but Austria is actually not as brave as the rumors say. Saying that Lacy has been fighting in Liegnitz for almost a year with an army of 100,000 and is still lingering on the Silesian border? Say you are all gone. Silesia won't be able to get it back in a short time because of His Majesty the Emperor's reforms. Austria's people are already in a state of unrest, and all forces are full of resentment. If the government is announced in a big way at this time to be so incompetent, big trouble will immediately occur. Especially the independent nobles in Hungary have been waiting for such an opportunity. They might be inspired to start a rebellion. Human nature is what it is. If Austria keeps pulling its hips, people will become numb. But suddenly someone told them that Austria had risen and the heavenly army was invincible, so their requirements would immediately be raised. At this time, if you try to get them to go back and accept the reality of Austria's crotch pulling, they will only fall into anger and despair, etc. Leopold II wiped off the cold sweat, hurriedly called the officer, and then ordered the attendant, "Gather the ministers together. This matter must be discussed seriously." The pro-British Count Ferenc on the side suddenly became anxious. "Your Majesty, if we don't refute the rumors, how can we sign an armistice agreement with Prussia?" He knew very well that if everyone in Austria believed that Marshal Lacy had recaptured Liegnitz, then all Austria should do was to take advantage of the situation and capture Breslau in one fell swoop. Anyone who dares to propose peace at this time will definitely be accused as a traitor by the whole country. Even if the excuse is that Austria is financially strapped and has to temporarily cease the war, then after the two countries withdraw their troops, where will the Liegnitz captured by Lacy be? You can't say that you gave it back to the damn Prussians again, right? Leopold II waved his hand impatiently. The armistice should also be discussed at the Imperial Council. Then he slammed the door and walked out. Just afternoon, the culprit of the fake news case, Viscount Maut, was brought before Leopold II by the Austrian secret police chief, Marquis Hartmann. The poor head of News Review only knew that a businessman named Kugel asked him to help his nephew who smuggled banned books and periodicals get away with playing in the Red Boots for a whole day. Then Maut's entourage and Harper, the assistant to the News Review officer, were interrogated. The former said that he was robbed and tied up in the alley until this morning, when he was rescued. The latter said that he saw the note signed by Maut, which allowed the news of the great victory to pass the review. Under the urging of Leopold II, the Austrian secret police became extremely efficient, and the preliminary investigation results were placed on his desk at noon the next day. That Kugel's hometown is Szolnok, and he came to Vienna 3 years ago. Marquis Hartmann reported he bought the Life and Truth newspaper a week ago, and the fake news first came out of this newspaper, according to the confession of Viscount Maut's entourage. One of the people who robbed him inadvertently brought out a little Hungarian accent. These people should be the ones who forged Viscount Maut's signature. Leopold II stared at the report on the table with a gloomy face. So, this matter is related to the Hungarians. It seems so, Your Majesty. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 419. Look, this is a slave, Leopold II said angrily. What on earth do they want to do, Margrave? Hartmann was unsure. Your Majesty, the Hungarian separatists have been trying to find an excuse to rebel. This is probably their humiliation to Vienna, if we don't handle it properly. Although Hungary is currently part of the Austrian Empire, it has always had its own small court. It not only settles finances independently, but also has a complete system of officials at all levels. It has always had a strong tendency to be independent. In order to stabilize Hungary, Austria gave them a large number of preferential policies, but the latter separatists would cause trouble every year. Joseph took a fancy to this and decided to pull Hungary out to take the blame. And it is impossible for Hungarian separatists to come to Schönbrunn Palace to plead their innocence unless they want to explain themselves in prison. That afternoon, Austria's most influential ministers gathered in Joseph II's bedroom to discuss how to deal with the current situation. The anti-Prussian faction headed by Kaunitz and the peacemaking faction headed by Ferenc were clearly on opposite sides. Joseph II was so ill that he could hardly speak. He just raised his hand with difficulty to signal the meeting to begin. Count Luckham of the peace faction was the first to say, Your Majesty, there is no big obstacle for us to take back the southern Netherlands. It is completely meaningless for the empire to continue to consume Silesia. Someone from the anti-Putish faction immediately retorted, My lord, if we cannot achieve a strategic breakthrough this time, you also know that it will be difficult for our country to concentrate so many resources to start a war against Prussia in a short period of time, and the recovery of Silesia will become far away. It's just that too many resources are wasted, so we should stop the loss as soon as possible. Please listen to the people's voices. Baron Ferrari held up a list. When everyone heard that Marshal Lacy had won, yesterday alone they donated 35,000 florins to the front line! Exclamation mark. And you want to make peace with the Prussians? Then please return these donations to everyone. Any victory is just a rumor. At this time, these powerful ministers all knew that there was no so-called victory of Liegnitz. It was just a rumor used by the Hungarians to humiliate Vienna. No, that is the long-cherished wish of all Austrians, Baron Ferrari said impassionately. They all believe it is true. Count Ferenc thought of the benefits promised by the British and began to join the battle group. Are we going to continue fighting over a rumor, Marquis? Lange said in a deep voice. Unless you take everyone to Silesia, there will be people who are convinced that Liegnitz has been recovered. Moreover, the peace negotiation will also damage the reputation of Marshal Lacy. Yes, yesterday they were still saying that you had won a great victory, but today the government refuted the rumor and said that you didn't even beat the shit out of it. From now on, Lacy's political and military life will be over, Ferenc immediately said. In fact, Marshal Lacy also favored an armistice. Lord Leckham added, I have been to the Nits front line. Judging from the current situation, it is simply impossible for our army to recapture Silesia before financial collapse. Foreign Minister Baron Turgot glanced at Kaunitz and said, the French Crown Prince has officially expressed his willingness to increase support for the Silesian War. The intervention of the French army will help us defeat the Prussians, just like it did in the southern Netherlands, Baron. Ferrari immediately answered. Now the whole country is immersed in the joy of victory. You all know what it means to retreat at this time. He pointed toward the southeast. The Hungarian separatists are the ones who most want us to negotiate peace with the Prussians. Recovering Silesia was, after all, Austria's greatest political correctness. As the main militant faction's firepower became more and more intense, Ferenc and the others were almost unable to speak point at this moment. Kaunitz, who had been silent all this time, suddenly stood up, raised his head, and looked at the ceiling at a 45-degree angle, clenched his fists, took a deep breath, and said loudly, "I wonder if you have heard of such a poem that has been circulated among the people recently. If we don't go to war, if we don't go to war, the Prussians use bayonets, killed us." He also points his finger at our bones and says, "Look, this is a slave." The entire bedroom suddenly fell silent. The main peace faction couldn't help but lower their heads, while the main war faction's eyes were filled with blazing flames, and some were even about to cry. This poem pierces the soul. Everyone instantly recalled the humiliation of Silesia being overrun by the Prussians, especially the last sentence made them full of anger. They just wanted to go to the front line in person, put a flintlock on the Prussians' head and roar. The Austrians are not easy to bully. This is the big killer that Joseph provided for Kaunitz. This short poem that has inspired countless patriotic soldiers to fight bloody battles in later generations. It is a blockbuster in any country that is invaded by foreign enemies today. So Joseph told Kaunitz the poem and asked him to recite it, if necessary, to turn the situation around. On the hospital bed, Joseph II suddenly trembled, raised his skinny right hand, and made a sound of aha. Leopold II hurriedly put his ear to his lips and listened carefully. After a while, he stood up, looked around at the crowd and said, "His Majesty said that Silesia must be recaptured at any cost. Immediately discuss assistance with France and send more troops to the front." He turned around and saw the Emperor's lips moving and added, "Austria will win in the end, Baron." Ferrari immediately raised his arms and shouted, "Austria will win. Long live His Majesty the Emperor." Other war advocates also shouted excitedly. A moment later, Count Franz and others had to join the shouting, "Long live His Majesty the Emperor. Take back Silesia." There was no way, in this atmosphere, whoever dared to propose peace again, His Majesty the Emperor would definitely throw him back to his hometown to feed pigs without hesitation. Joseph turned his head to listen to the crowd outside the window chanting loudly and point to our bones and say, "Look, these are slaves." He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. It seemed that Kaunitz had won the victory in Schönbrunn Palace, and France's strategic investment in the southern Netherlands would not be in vain. With Austria's current national strength, if it wants to defeat Prussia, it must rely on the power of France. Then he can make an offer. However, this time, some practical support must be given to Austria, otherwise Vienna will still choose to negotiate peace after the victory of Liegnitz has passed. Now that Hanover and Prussia have withdrawn from the southern Netherlands, their own Guards Corps can also withdraw to Silesia. To show their prowess, of course, they cannot conquer the entire Silesia, which will seriously weaken Prussia and make it possible for Austria to reunify Germany. Basically, helping Austria to regain a province in Silesia is enough. One province is used to exchange for the Wallonia region of the southern Netherlands. Whether in terms of area, politics, or economy, Austria is a sure win. However, being involved in a war against Prussia requires detailed strategic planning. It is necessary to be able to take down a province, but not to suffer too much loss, and to be able to withdraw at any time. While Joseph was thinking, Eamon knocked on the door with an old man. Joseph recognized the man as Mrs. Delvaux's old butler. He immediately had a bad premonition in his heart. Sure enough, after the old man bowed respectfully, he lowered his head and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, the lady has returned to heaven." Chapter 420 Walloon Special Trade Zone. Mrs. Delvaux's burial ceremony was rather simple. The old lady didn't have many friends during her lifetime. In order not to offend Baron Walter, they had basically cut off all contact with the Delvaux family. At this time, only 7 or 8 people came to say goodbye to her. However, the appearance of Joseph made Father Koch, who was originally a little listless, immediately become serious, and his voice, when he read the holy word, became more solemn. Camelia, who was wearing a black dress, stood aside with a dull expression, looking at her only relative in the world with red and swollen eyes, seemingly at a loss. It wasn't until the priest finished his prayers and began to offer incense in front of the corpse that she seemed to suddenly understand and cried, "Wow!" Joseph rushed forward to comfort the helpless girl. "Mrs. Delvaux will be watching you in heaven and will not be separated from you." After the tedious ceremony, Mrs. Delvaux's coffin was carried to the nearest church by servants, and Camelia finally calmed down due to exhaustion of strength. As soon as Joseph walked out of the gate of the manor, he saw Talleyrand coming towards him and saluted him. "Your Highness, it's not easy to find you." The Foreign Secretary looked at the black coffin again and made the sign of the cross on his chest. "May God have mercy on this poor soul." "That is Her Majesty the Queen's wet nurse." Joseph also made the sign of the cross and asked Talleyrand, "Are you in a hurry?" Talleyrand came closer. "Yes, Your Highness. Baron Turgot invited me to have a meeting, which should be about the reinforcement of Silesia. Do you think there is anything that I need to pay special attention to?" Joseph nodded slightly. "This is to prepare for the official signing of the agreement between himself and Emperor Shinra. The main things are usually discussed at this time. I will transfer the Guard Corps to Silesia. You can tell Baron Turgot that the military breakthrough will be achieved. However, France will still maintain a state of non-declaration of war. You can withdraw at any time without declaring war. After all, France is not here to fight for Austria." Talleyrand heard that His Royal Highness the Dauphin was going to use elite troops, and he suddenly felt confident to ask the Austrians for a price, and he quickly jotted it down in his notebook. Joseph continued, "Besides, I will see to it that Russia does not interfere in Silesia." Talleyrand's eyes flashed with surprise, and he quickly lowered his head to write it down. This may not seem like a big deal, but it is enough to affect the direction of the war in Silesia. Back then, Catherine II only mobilized 40,000 troops to assemble westward. The battle for the Bavarian throne came to an abrupt end before everyone arrived, and Prussia and Austria immediately returned to the negotiating table. Moreover, the Crown Prince said so confidently, as if the Russian Tsar would definitely do what he said. "As for our request, there is only one." Joseph looked at the Foreign Secretary and lowered his voice. "That is the Walloon district." Talleyrand nodded and took note, then hesitated and said, "Your Highness, given the current atmosphere in Vienna, this may not be easy to do. At the moment, the whole of Austria is immersed in the frenzy to regain territory. Although the Walloon region is small, the loss of even one town in Austria at this time will arouse strong opposition within the country. Your concerns are very reasonable." Joseph nodded thoughtfully, but soon smiled. "Then let's find another way. For example, from the corner of his eye, he saw that the morning team had gone away. He sighed helplessly and told Demandé to go by himself. Then he told Talleyrand in detail about his plan. For example, setting up a special trade zone, Schönbrunn, Palace Point in the bedroom of Joseph II. Surprise flashed in Leopold II's eyes. "You mean that the French promised to send a strong legion into Silesia, and that they would be responsible for most of the expenses of this legion?" It's not that Joseph is poor and generous, but he knows that with Austria's current financial situation, if it continues to bear the military expenses of the Guards Corps, it may not last long. Even though the number of Guards Corps is not too large, the cost is quite high. First of all, the salary of soldiers is much higher than that of ordinary troops, and then there is the supplement and maintenance of various new equipment, and even daily food and drinks are much more expensive than other armies. Baron Turgot nodded and said, "Yes, Your Majesty." Archbishop Talleyrand also said that the coalition forces will definitely achieve a strategic breakthrough. Leopold II couldn't help but clenched his fists. "If France can really convince Russia to stay on the sidelines, we will have great hope of regaining Silesia." Joseph II, who was on the hospital bed next to him, also made a sound of a with a rare smile on his face. Turgot continued, "Your Majesty, the French have always been unwilling to declare war on Prussia, obviously because they do not want to get involved too deeply. It Doesn't matter. Leopold II waved his hand nonchalantly. As the war situation changes, we have many ways to keep them in Silesia. A dozen ideas for tying France to the Austrian chariot flashed through his mind in an instant, and he couldn't help but smile. His sister still lacked political experience. How could she escape so easily once she got involved in a war? If Joseph had been there, he would have smiled back. He naturally knew the principle of it is difficult to get off the pirate ship, but he also clearly remembered that in less than 3 months, Joseph II would be called to heaven by the Lord. At that time, Austria will first hold a funeral for the old emperor, and then the new emperor will be crowned and ascend the throne. You know, the coronation of Austria is not a simple matter. Leopold II must first go through the process of the electors to select the emperor, be crowned as the Holy Roman Emperor, and then start his long journey, and be crowned as the monarch of Hungary, Bohemia, Croatia, Transylvania, Mantua, Galicia, Lodomeria and the Austrian Netherlands. What? You want to be lazy and miss a place? Then you will lose the legal basis for ruling there, and believe it or not, there will be nobles trying to fill the vacancy next year. Look at the emblem of the Holy Roman Emperor to know how complicated the title is, so by then, Austria will definitely have no time to continue fighting, and Joseph can take the idle French army back to Paris, after participating in the coronation ceremony of the Holy Roman Emperor. You can't let your master rest for half a year and let us French fight Prussia, right? After confirming the bright prospects of the Silesia War, Leopold II looked at Baron Turgot again. What about France's request, Archbishop? Talleyrand said that many French people had invested in Wallonia before, so they hope that it can become a special trade zone. Special trade zone? Oh, that is, France and Austria can invest and trade there, and the administration of Wallonia will be presided over by the Chamber of Commerce. Turgot said. At the same time, in order to ensure the fairness of trade, there will be no permanent troops there, and the Wallonia Police Department will be responsible for public security. Chapter 421 Destiny in the Future. Joseph II on the side immediately made an anxious sound. When he heard this, Leopold II leaned over to listen, and then said to Turgot, "Your Majesty, did the French mention the sovereignty of Wallonia, Archbishop?" Talleyrand said that the sovereignty still belongs to the King of the Southern Netherlands. What? About the province of Ghent? Leopold II asked again. Ghent is located on the south side of the Atlantic Ocean, and can control the estuary of the Rhine River. Its strategic location is extremely important. Ghent is not included in the special trade zone. Turgot added, nor does Bruges. Bruges is another coastal province next to Ghent. Leopold II was relieved when he heard this. In this case, the so-called special trade zone is completely inland, including only the 2 provinces of Mons and Namur, and part of the southern part of Liege. The area is only slightly larger than Luxembourg. As long as the coastal provinces are in hand, plus Antwerp, the Rhine estuary can be firmly controlled, and the greatest interests of the southern Netherlands will not be lost. He looked at Joseph II and nodded. Your Majesty, I think this condition is acceptable. In fact, the Rhine estuary, which he valued most, was just a hot potato for Joseph. The Rhine is the main commercial artery of the German region. If France controls the Rhine estuary, it will gain huge trade advantages in the German region and even squeeze Britain out of here. At that time, the British will not hesitate to start a national war to drive France out of here. Historically, one of the core factors for Britain to actively instigate the anti-French alliance was that France occupied the entire southern Netherlands. In addition, if the British want to have a crooked mind on Wallonia, they must first cross the coastal provinces controlled by Austria, which has become a barrier for France. Therefore, it is best to leave the coastal provinces to Austria. What Joseph cares about is only the coal resources in Wallonia and the large French population. Moreover, after the establishment of the Walloon Special Trade Zone, it can be connected with Luxembourg. When the track is completed, the coal and iron resources of the 2 places will be combined to become another powerful engine of the French Industrial Revolution. As for the sovereignty, it is just a false name. After the previous operation, the Walloon Chamber of Commerce is basically promoted by Joseph, and even the president is a Frenchman. The original military supplies preparation committee has already controlled all aspects of trade. If the Chamber of Commerce manages the administration, this is a very common model in France, then it means that Joseph controls this place. At the same time, there will be no Austrian troops stationed in Walloon, and the Walloon police will be the only violent agency here. It seems that this will be an undefended trade zone. But the combat effectiveness of the police has a huge floating space. Haven't you heard of the Paris Police Academy? Take the Walloon police to train first, and don't blame me if your regular army cries when they are beaten. Joseph II was silent for a long time and thought that this was a sure win, so he nodded with difficulty and squeezed out a word from his throat. Agree. Just when Joseph was busy signing the Vienna Special Agreement with Leopold II, Madame Delvaux's funeral had completed a series of ceremonies and officially held a funeral. When Joseph rushed to the cemetery from Schönbrunn Palace, the guests who attended the funeral had left, and only a newly built grave was isolated there. On the tombstone was engraved Madame Delvaux's name and a line of small words. She was once remembered by the most beautiful queen in the world. Camelia was still standing in front of the tombstone, lowering her head for a long time, and unwilling to leave. Joseph stepped forward and patted her on the back, saying softly, "The dead are gone, and you will have a new home. Her Majesty the Queen is waiting for you at the Palace of Versailles." The girl slowly turned her head, slowly knelt and saluted, choking with sobs. "Thank you very much for your care with Her Majesty the Queen. May God bless you and your Majesty." Joseph nodded and said, "I will return to Paris the day after tomorrow. Will you follow Madame Delvaux's wishes and go with me?" Camelia glanced at her grandmother's tombstone and nodded with tears in her eyes. "Yes, Your Highness. Paris is the only place I can go." As she was speaking, the court officials of Schönbrunn Palace came over under the leadership of Emmanuel, saluted to Joseph and said, "Your Highness, the Honorable Crown Prince, His Majesty the Emperor invites you to attend the ball tonight." The treaty that had a huge impact on Austria was signed, so it was natural to celebrate it. Joseph had to comfort the girl a few more words, leaving 2 servants to take care of her, and rushed back to Schönbrunn Palace to participate in political and social activities the next afternoon. Camelia finally had her first meal in nearly 2 days, and then wiped away the tears from her eyes, ready to go out and say goodbye to her only friend. The servants sent by Joseph to take care of her immediately prepared the carriage. The servants of the Delvaux family had been dismissed, leaving only Camelia's personal maid, and these things could only be done by them. In a mid-range villa on Rylstone Street, Mr. Basil enthusiastically brought hot cocoa to Camelia. "Drink some, it's added with a lot of sugar, it can soothe your soul." Seeing the girl silently picked up the cup, he asked carefully again, "Well, what are your plans for the future?" He tried to muster up the courage to say, "If you want, I can take you away from Vienna, anywhere, and then I will take care of you for the rest of your life." Although he was Camelia's music teacher, he was also deeply infatuated with her. So when others avoided her because they were afraid of Baron Walter, he still firmly protected her. Now that Madame Delvaux has passed away, he is the only one in the world who can protect this poor girl. He can't deal with Walter, but he can take her away. For her, he would rather give up his comfortable life and spend the rest of his life in exile. However, before he said anything, he heard the girl whispered, "Grandma wrote a letter to Her Majesty the Queen of France, and the French Crown Prince will take me to Paris." She looked up at Basil. "I'm scared. It's a distant and unfamiliar place. I don't know what kind of fate is waiting for me. Do you think I should go?" Basil's heart tightened, and he immediately wanted to say no, "Don't go," but he was stunned again. The French Crown Prince, he slowly lowered his head. If Camelia could go to the Palace of Versailles, it would be 10,000 times better than following him to avoid Baron Walter. That was the life she should have. It only took him 2 seconds to make his eyes firm. This was an opportunity for her. He heard Camelia mention the relationship between her grandmother and the Queen of France, which meant that she had many opportunities to get in touch with the future King of France. Although she could never become the Crown Princess due to her background, as long as she could get close to the Crown Prince even a little bit, her fate would change dramatically. Chapter 422 How can I live without you? Camellia. Basil held the girl's shoulders tightly, staring at her extremely beautiful purple eyes, and said in a serious tone, "You must go to Paris. Not only must you go, but you should also try every means to get close to the prince." Camellia was obviously surprised and said nervously, "Why? And it is impossible for me to contact the prince. Please believe the teacher." Basil seemed to be giving her the last lesson, and his expression was very serious. "You just need to try to stay by the side of the Queen of France. It is unlikely to be her maid, but a maid should be able to do it. You are very familiar with the court etiquette of Vienna, and Her Majesty the Queen will definitely like you. The prince must often go to see the Queen, so you can often meet him. You must first understand his habits and preferences. Start with a simple greeting, and try to talk to him more. You are so beautiful, no one will refuse to talk to you." Camellia stared at Basil, who was both her teacher and friend, in a daze. "What are you talking about? This is totally unimaginable." But Basil did not hesitate. "You have to play to your strengths. I mean, even in the Palace of Versailles, you are the most eye-catching girl among all the girls. You have to make the prince fascinated by you. You have to be more proactive. No, it is more important to grasp the degree. You can't let him feel that you are too proactive. You have to give him a very natural feeling. Oh, I know this is difficult, and you don't have similar experience, but you can ask the ladies of the Palace of Versailles for advice. They are all very good at this. Of course, this requires giving them some benefits, and you have to be willing to spend money." The music teacher became more and more excited. "When those skills work, when the relationship between the prince and you is very harmonious, you have to seize the opportunity, become his mistress." Camellia struggled to break free from Basil's hands, as if she was stung by a bee. Her face was as red as the sunset, staring at the ground and shaking her head. "Don't say it. How can this be possible? I can't." "No, you can," Basil said loudly. "This is an opportunity that many people dream of, and it is a destiny given to you by God. Believe me, you have to do this." The girl threw the cocoa cup on the table in panic and stepped back. She always trusted her teacher and never made mistakes in handling things according to his instructions, but at this moment, she didn't know whether she should listen to him. I came to say goodbye to you." She suddenly remembered the purpose of her trip, retreated all the way to the door, touched the door handle with her back, and then continued, "I will write to you. You will always be my most trusted friend. May God bless you. Now, I think I should go." After she finished speaking, she pulled the door open and fled from Basil's villa without looking back. Basil stretched out his hand to her back, but took it back tremblingly. His eyes were red, and he murmured in a low voice, "Will we meet again, my Camellia?" "Oh, no, it's better not to see each other. I hope you can live happily in Paris. I hope you can be happy. You must be happy. But, without you in my world, how can I live?" He saw the girl seem to look back at him before getting on the carriage and immediately waved to her. "Let's go, Camellia. Go with the crown prince. It's okay. Smile." "Yes." Smile. Camellia got on the carriage, feeling very confused. Mr. Basil actually said that it was her fate, the fate of becoming that man's mistress. The handsome face of the French crown prince flashed through her mind, and she trembled slightly, her cheeks flushed. It was indeed as the teacher said. How many girls dreamed of getting his favor? Is it really necessary to do that? But the teacher never lied to herself, and the decisions he made for her were never wrong. When she returned home in her wild thoughts, it was almost dusk. From a distance, she saw the gate of the manor was open. There should be no one there, and hurriedly said to the French servant nervously, "Mr. Eric, someone seems to have come to the house." The carriage stopped far away, and Eric got off alone to check the situation in the manor. A moment later, several people in palace guard uniforms pushed him out and shouted something. Camellia only vaguely heard words such as fraud and confiscation. In a luxurious villa southwest of Vienna, Baron Walter was hugging a heavily made up woman, raising his glass and proudly saying to the people opposite, "The old thing is finally dead. Ha ha ha, got, you finally remembered that you haven't taken her away. And I can finally get that cute little lark on." the sofa. A slightly fat noble young man touched the chest of the woman next to him and deliberately joked, "Fred, I guess Miss Camellia will definitely reject you, just like before." Haha. Several other nobles also smiled. Walter pushed the woman who was clinging to him away and said disdainfully, "I have asked Judge Mir and Marquis Wilhorner to make arrangements. She will definitely not be able to refuse me this time. Just wait and see." He patted the cushion beside him and said proudly, "In half a month at most, or even next week, you will see my little dessert sitting here." The other nobles began to follow suit and even told a few dirty jokes to congratulate Walter on getting what he wanted. "Well, I have to take her to the party at the end of the month." Walter touched his chin and smiled lewdly. "Those guys in Buckhorse will definitely be drooling with envy." Haha. Just as Walter was showing off to his friends, Joseph was in the room on the second floor of Schönbrunn Palace, frowning at the servant Eric in front of him. "You mean, the palace guard sees the Delvaux manor?" The latter nodded. "Yes, your highness. They said that Mrs. Delvaux was involved in a fraud case during her lifetime. In addition to the manor, 3 hectares of real estate in the northern suburbs of Vienna were also seized." The law enforcement powers and responsibilities of this era were very vague. The army was an important law enforcement department, while the police usually only dealt with civilian cases. The fact that the palace guards could be used showed that this fraud case was very serious. Camellia, who had been comforted by the maiden, calmed down, wiped her tears again. When she heard this, Joseph's face became gloomy. He knew that his mother would give her wet nurse a sum of money every year, at least 4 or 5,000 livres. Over the past decade, this money alone is enough for the Delvaux family to buy the manor and the real estate. She has no need to commit any fraud. Eric continued. "Oh, by the way, your highness, the palace guards also said that there is a Baron Walter who knows the relevant evidence." When Joseph heard the name Walter, he immediately understood. It turns out that this guy's causing trouble. Chapter 423 Compensation. It is obvious that Walter has used some means to involve the Delvaux family's property in the lawsuit, so Camellia will immediately be penniless. And she has no relatives or friends. Even if she has, I'm afraid no one dares to take her in under Walter's threat. Then she can only compromise with that bastard in the end. Joseph's mouth showed a sneer. He didn't even bother to pay attention to that Walter before, but he didn't expect that this guy would take the initiative to jump on his face. Then teach him a lesson. He walked to Camellia and comforted her softly. "Don't worry, I will never let Mrs. Delvaux's reputation be damaged, and the villain who framed her will also get the punishment she deserves." As for how to operate, he didn't need to do this kind of thing himself. Just let cornets handle it. The next morning, the court officials of Schönbrunn Palace came to Joseph's room and respectfully invited him to attend the farewell banquet held by His Majesty the Emperor for him at noon. Joseph smiled coldly and said calmly, "Thank you for your kindness, Your Majesty, but I'm afraid I have to stay in Vienna for a while longer." The court official left in surprise. After a short while, Austrian State Minister Cornetz and Baron Farrari, Baron Turgot and other ministers hurried over after the salute. Cornetz asked anxiously, "Your Highness, you were originally scheduled to return to Paris tonight. I don't know why you changed your schedule." He couldn't help but be anxious. Austria had just decided to make a big move in Silesia, and the front line was eagerly waiting for French reinforcement. If the French Crown Prince did not bring the Vienna Special Agreement back to the country, the French army would not be able to set off. Joseph said with a gloomy face, "You know, Madame Delvaux had just passed away, and someone slandered her for participating in a fraud case. I must wait until the truth of this matter is found out before I can go back with peace of mind." "Madame Delvaux?" Cornetz looked at Foreign Minister Turgot in surprise, and the latter whispered a few words in his ear. "Queen Mary's wet nurse?" Cornetz frowned immediately. Although generally speaking, the birth of a wet nurse is not too high, sometimes she will have a deep affection for the child she has taken care of, which is a bit troublesome. He hurriedly signaled to Joseph, "Your Highness, please return to Paris first. I promise to give you a satisfactory answer." "No, I will wait for the result here," Joseph said calmly. Seeing his firm attitude, Cornetz had no choice but to leave, and immediately asked someone to summon the guard officer in charge of the matter. He had just learned the general situation from the servant of the crown prince. He cursed in his heart, which idiot was it, delaying the war in Silesia for some fraud case. After asking about the case, Cornets went to the head of the secret police, Marquis Hartmann, and asked him to help investigate the matter with the intervention of the secret police. The officer quickly confessed the captain of the palace guard, Marquis Ulhorner. The secret police then found Judge Mir, who tried the fraud case. The so-called fraud case was fabricated rather hastily, and the evidences before and after contradicted each other. The secret police interrogated the case for only one day, and everyone from the fraud victim to the judge told the truth. Of course, this was because the Minister of State intervened. Otherwise such a low-level false accusation could have seized all of Camelia's property. The false accuser was thrown into prison, and the judge quickly dropped the case. Cornets excitedly went to tell Joseph the good news, but the latter still had no intention of returning to Paris. Cornets reported the matter to Leopold II in a panic, and the latter was also in a state of panic, and ordered Marquis Hartmann to re-examine the case. The secret police immediately took heavy measures against all those involved in the case. When the captain of the palace guard and the judge learned that Leopold II had personally asked about the matter, they were a little confused. The girl was just a small nobleman at the bottom. How could even the crown prince be alarmed? Note 1. They dared not hide it any longer. It was not worth sacrificing their future for a few thousand florins, and immediately confessed Baron Walter. Walter was flirting with a woman at a ball, hosted by a nobleman, and was taken away by the emperor's personal guards. Due to the sudden incident and the level of communication at that time, he had not received any news of the reversal of the case until then. After Leopold II learned the whole story, he scolded his brother-in-law severely, and then asked Cornets to invite the French crown prince. When Joseph entered Leopold II's reception room, he saw a 20-year-old nobleman with a wretched appearance standing tremblingly with his head down. After he and Leopold II exchanged greetings, the latter immediately hit Walter on the back with his cane and shouted, "Apologize to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince immediately, you bastard." Joseph raised his hand to stop him. "Your Majesty, I'm not involved in this case. No need to apologize to me. I think Austria should have corresponding laws to judge false accusations, forged evidence and bribery. Oh, by the way, the person he falsely accused is a respectable noble lady, and she has already passed away." Leopold II looked at his legal advisor, and the old man hurriedly stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, if the charges brought by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince are proven, then Baron Walter will be sentenced to 20 years in prison and double the amount of the false accusation." Joseph nodded with satisfaction. "Praise the justice of Austria. I think this is a good way to deal with it." Walter was immediately frightened and turned pale. He turned around and knelt in front of Leopold II, begging, "Your Majesty, I was wrong. I'm willing to pay compensation. Please don't put me in jail, please." The more arrogant and domineering a guy is on weekdays, the more cowardly he will be when he encounters an adverse situation. Leopold II glanced at Joseph, who was studying the murals on the ceiling, and gritted his teeth helplessly. For the situation in Silesia, he could only sacrifice this useless brother-in-law. "Guards, bring Baron Walter." He had just said half of his words when his wife Ludovica walked in quickly from the side door, saluted him and Joseph hurriedly, and then wiped her tears in public. "Fred made a stupid mistake. Please give him a chance. I'm willing to compensate the Delvaux family for 80,000 florins." Mrs. Delvaux left behind an estate of about 60,000 livres, or 25,000 florins. She offered 3 times the compensation right away, which seemed full of sincerity. Seeing that Joseph was unmoved, she gritted her teeth again and said, 100,000 florins should be enough to make up for Mrs. Delvaux's reputation. "Your Highness, please be kind." Joseph breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that, even if Walter was thrown into prison, with his status, as long as he left Vienna, he would most likely be secretly released. It would be better to fight for some benefits for Camelia. 150,000 florins, plus an apology to Mrs. Delvaux and the newspaper, before Ludovica could say anything. Leopold II immediately nodded and said, "Thank you for your tolerance, Your Highness. I will do as you said." Joseph was stunned immediately. Why did he feel like it was going to be less? Note 1. Here is a reminder for readers who have forgotten the previous content. Leopold II is the younger brother of Joseph II. Since the latter has no heirs, according to the order of succession, Leopold II is the current Crown Prince of Austria and the designated candidate for the next Holy Roman Emperor. At the same time, Leopold II was also the Grand Duke of Tuscany, so others would address him as Your Majesty. Chapter 424 Currency Reform. Western Bavaria Point in the suburbs of Nördlingen, a row of knights holding Dolphin and Iris flags passed on the muddy road. Behind them was the French Crown Prince's convoy surrounded by a large number of guards in the carriage. Joseph rubbed his sore shoulders and turned his head to look at the old town outside the window. This was the battlefield of the famous Battle of Nördlingen during the 30 Years' War, but after the erosion of time, it has returned to tranquility and peace. The blonde girl sitting opposite saw his movements, stood up hurriedly, and whispered, "Your Highness, let me give you a massage." Joseph was slightly startled, mainly because he had never had such a thoughtful service in his previous long journeys, but he quickly nodded and smiled. "Thank you for your hard work. It's my honor to serve you." Camelia bent over and turned from the low carriage to his side. Her slender fingers pressed on Joseph's shoulders. The force was neither light nor heavy, and he immediately squinted his eyes in comfort. After a moment, Joseph's fatigue was swept away. The girl saw that his coffee cup was empty and immediately picked up the coffee pot to fill it halfway for him. It is not suitable to fill it up in a bumpy car, as it is easy to spill. Yes, after leaving Vienna, Camelia almost took on all the work of Joseph's servants and was more meticulous and thoughtful than the previous 3 servants. These were all taught to her by Madame Delvaux. To be a wet nurse for an Austrian princess, one must have some skills, and she was even better than her teacher originally. Camelia was very hesitant about Mr. Basil's suggestion, but after the French Dauphin severely taught the bastard who had threatened and harassed her for more than a year, and gave her the compensation of 150,000 florins, she made up her mind completely. The teacher was right. No, to be more precise, she was deeply attracted by His Highness's temperament, charm, and the sense of security he brought. Joseph nodded to thank her and took a sip of coffee, which was mellow and pleasant. He could not help but nod again. This girl's coffee making skills were first rate. And then he picked up a pen and continued to write the Walloon Investment and Development Plan. The agreement with Austria stipulates that both parties can invest in the Walloon Special Trade Zone. Joseph hopes to complete the layout of Walloon as soon as possible, while Austria is busy with the Silesian War. For example, implement preferential immigration policies to allow more French people to invest and live in Walloon. In addition, there is the construction of the police force. The first batch of Walloon police officers planned to be recruited will have 4,000 people, half of whom will be sent to France for training and then rotated. The senior officials of the police bureau are all French. After a large number of immigrants, soon no one can tell whether they are native Walloonians or immigrants. The two sides are completely seamless from language to living habits. After French investors hold controlling stakes in almost all coal mines in Walloon, as long as the above 2 points are achieved, France will actually control this place. At dusk, the convoy stopped in the east of Stuttgart. Joseph looked at the investment and development plan in his hand and couldn't help but sigh. After 2 years of operation, a good situation has been created for France. In addition to the southern Netherlands, the situation in Tunisia has also stabilized, and the second wave of immigration has begun. In terms of domestic industry, coal, iron, textiles, chemicals, etc. have entered the fast lane, waiting for the accumulation of quantitative changes to usher in an explosion. However, all of this requires money. Whether it is investment in Wallonia, development of Tunisia, training of the army, police, and promoting the industrial revolution, a large amount of funds are required. According to Joseph's plan, tax reforms and navy expansion will be carried out in the future. These are all gold-eating monsters at present. The French treasury still carries a huge deficit of more than 2 billion livres. In the past 6 months, many wars have been fought, and a lot of military expenses have been spent. At present, it is more difficult to squeeze out some money to complete the above things than to squeeze water from a stone. Joseph followed Xod into the manor where he stayed thinking in his heart that he should make up his mind to carry out currency reform by taking advantage of the army's series of victories in the southern Netherlands and North Africa and the opportunity of the royal prestige point throughout France. Replacing gold and silver coins with paper money, coupled with the two huge markets of Wallonia and Tunisia, the minting bonus alone can ease the current tight financial situation. Point with the current industrial and agricultural development speed of France, it is entirely possible to raise inflation a little bit. This is even beneficial to economic development. Before the country's overall materials continue to increase, printing the currency corresponding to the materials can effectively avoid the situation where trade is affected by insufficient currency. At the same time, the moderate depreciation brought about by inflation can also encourage people to invest more instead of hoarding all their money. The extra money is controlled by the French Reserve Bank and can be quickly invested in the most needed areas, shortening the waiting time for investment to the shortest point. In addition, as France continues to trade with other countries, French paper money will inevitably flow into other countries in this era. Countries have a weak sense of protection for monetary sovereignty. This is due to the trading habits brought about by the long-term use of gold and silver coins. Most of the currencies of other countries can be circulated in their own countries, at least in the short term. French paper money can be circulated in small quantities in neighboring countries, although each country may not hold much French banknotes, because most merchants tend to exchange them for gold and silver coins. Even if the banknotes only stay in their hands for 1 or 2 months, all countries will add up to a huge amount of money. And it is equivalent to France exchanging their goods for paper. After a simple dinner, when Joseph entered the bedroom tiredly, he smelled a faint scent of incense, and then saw that Camelia had made the bed neatly. Well, she even put the pillow in the most comfortable position. The girl was startled when she heard the noise. She turned around hurriedly and knelt slightly to the prince. Under the candlelight, her cheeks suddenly flushed. Joseph noticed that the atmosphere was a little subtle and looked at her in surprise and said, Is there something wrong?" No, nothing." Camelia suddenly lowered her head and ran to the bedroom door. Please go to bed." The two servants at the door were stunned. Why didn't the new lady finish her work? The two of them hurried back into the house and helped His Royal Highness change into his nightgown. In fact, Joseph really didn't like others helping him change his clothes, but in the Palace of Versailles, it was a necessary etiquette for others to change his nightgown for him. Usually it had to be done by nobles of status, so he could only let it go. Camelia returned to her room, closed the door, and covered her cheeks, her heart pounding, and she muttered to herself, This is too difficult. How should I do it? Chapter 425 Tunisia Development. Just when Camelia was so nervous that she didn't know what to do, Perna, who had been hiding at the end of the corridor and peeking, saw the girl who was so beautiful that her heart trembled, running out of the crown prince's dormitory and then returned to her own. After waiting for a long time in the room, I finally let out a long sigh of relief. She didn't know why she did this. In short, ever since the girl named Camelia appeared, she felt an inexplicable sense of crisis in her heart. Especially as a personal doctor, she has not been in the same car with His Royal Highness the Crown Prince for a long time. His Highness often works in the car, and Mr. Raymond said that would affect His Highness. And on the way out of Vienna, Camelia was always in His Highness's car. Perna turned around and pressed her back against the wall, silently shaking her head. No, she shouldn't have any other thoughts. But the next moment, the prince's handsome appearance occupied her mind. Perhaps I should be braver, otherwise your highness will be. She seemed to be frightened by her own words. She suddenly became excited and hurriedly ran back to her room with her head lowered. She couldn't help but say in her heart, God, please give me guidance. From the next day, Joseph unexpectedly discovered that Dr. Perna seemed to be constantly looking for excuses to hang around him. After he coughed several times, she even said she wanted to confirm whether her pneumonia had returned, so she stayed in her carriage. The carriage became a little crowded. In the end, Emin got out of the car helplessly and followed the Crown Prince's car on horseback. In the carriage, Joseph started busy compiling reports on Tunisia's immigration policy. The two girls greeted each other politely and then bowed their heads in silence. In this strange atmosphere, Perna was so embarrassed that she could dig out of Versailles palace with her toes, but she still gritted her teeth and insisted on sitting there, stealing glances from time to time at the charming grace of the crown prince as he handled government affairs seriously. In this way, under the protection of the two girls, Joseph finally made it all the way to Paris without any accidents. Perna did not become brave after all, and Camelia still hasn't found the trick. Joseph was well taken care of, and he took Camelia to the little Trianon in high spirits to pay homage to his mother. Queen Mary hugged Mrs. Delvaux's granddaughter, tears streaming down her face like a stream, and then she was about to announce that Camelia would be her third maid. However, Countess de Berninac immediately reminded her carefully that Miss Delvaux was not suitable to be a maid to Her Majesty the Queen. Given her background, in the end, Queen Mary had to comply with the palace rules and let Camelia be her maid so that she could stay with her. Note 1. Joseph came out from his mother's house, and as soon as he reached the door of his bedroom, he saw Brian waiting there. The latter came up to him from afar, saluted him and said, "Your Highness, I congratulate you on a series of important diplomatic achievements in Vienna. Our alliance with Austria has deepened. This is all with the blessing of God." Joseph made the sign of the cross skillfully and then motioned the chief minister to enter the room. "Is there something urgent for you?" "Oh, please sit down and talk." Brian nodded hurriedly and said, "Yes, Your Highness. It's Tunisia. The Tunisia trade and construction plan you formulated previously has been implemented, but we have encountered some troubles due to the behavior of certain tribes." Joseph frowned slightly when he heard this. After Moroni held Tamiret, the Shura army completely drove the Moroccan army back to Algiers, and Tunisia's security environment was greatly improved. Then, under the propaganda of the government, France began a second wave of development boom in Tunisia. Tens of thousands of business and agricultural immigrants flocked to Tunisia, causing signs of an economic boom there. So Joseph prepared in advance, formulated a decree, cancelled local tariffs and tolls between various places in Tunisia, reduced commercial taxes, and began to widen roads, lay wooden tracks and other infrastructure. In Tunisia's political map, tribal forces dominate villages and towns. There had been trouble before with the tribe refusing to pay taxes, and Joseph used the Versailles model to resolve it. What happened again this time? He looked at Brian and said, "Please tell me the details." "Yes, Your Highness." Brian nodded. "The main problem is that the large tribes do not allow certain foreign goods to enter the villages and towns. At the same time, almost all tribes charge high "safety fees" on the roads they control. In addition, they often extort businessmen and farmers who go to cultivate land. He looked bitter. "You know, Tunisia does not have enough troops and can only be stationed near big cities. It has no ability to govern these distant tribes. And even if the army is sent to deter them, they will express their compliance in person. According to the decree, the status quo will be restored immediately after the army leaves." Joseph's expression also became serious, let alone North Africa in the 18th century. Even in the 21st century, it is difficult for governments in many countries to effectively manage local forces, especially for a force like a tribe, which is maintained by blood relations. It is even more difficult for external forces to intervene. The Tunisian tribes were relatively accepting of taxation, a matter that had existed since the Phoenician era, but now that they were asked not to charge arbitrary fees or to circulate goods freely, they began to resist. Joseph originally planned to use Tunisia as a pilot to test local tax reforms and then promote them in France. Unexpectedly, he encountered such great resistance. Brian said carefully, "Your Highness, do you think you should implement the decree in big cities first, and then expand the scope after Tunisians get used to it?" Joseph shook his head immediately. He is still waiting for Tunisia's dividends to feed back to the French treasury. If he does it slowly like this, it may not be promoted in 10 or 8 years. Moreover, this will make the Tunisian tribes realize that the government can't do anything to them, and there will still be various obstacles when there are new decrees in the future. He couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Fundamentally speaking, the reason why local forces do not obey government management lies in transportation and communication. The roads are not smooth, and the tribes have too little contact with the outside world, which will inevitably form an independent small world. Only when there are more exchanges with the outside world and the formation of interest relations can they integrate into the whole country. This requires building roads as soon as possible, but it is not something that can be completed overnight. To build infrastructure across Tunisia. The other is to significantly increase the number of troops or police, and use violent machines to monitor and intimidate the tribes at any time, so that they dare not disobey the law. But this requires a huge amount of funds. Maintaining more than 100,000 troops in the whole of Tunisia may solve the problem, but most of the tax revenue will be eaten up by military expenses. When Joseph thought of this, he was suddenly stunned. Wait, if you want to use the army to intimidate the tribes, you don't have to station the army near the tribes. Note 1. The Queen's Maid is a kind of palace official position, usually held by nobles with high status and close relationship with the Queen, who can take walks with the Queen, play games, etc. Maids are simple servants, the kind that can only stand at the door at ordinary times. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.